Good evening. I'd like to call the City Council meeting to order. Will the clerk please do the roll call?
Council members Hannah.
Here.
Grunmeyer.
Yes.
Bash. Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
Yes.
Mayor Newton.
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Cheryl. Do we have any cards from the public?
No cards.
Okay, thank you. We will now recess to closed session. Good evening. I'd like to reconvene the public session, and we'll have a report of actions taken in closed session by the city attorney. John?
Yeah, we discussed the matter listed in closed session on the agenda, and there are no reportable actions.
Thank you, John. If you would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance by Councilmember Hannah, and then remain standing for the invocation by Pastor Spencer Parrish. Thank you.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening.
Lord, we come to you tonight and first want to thank you for the blessings that you've put in our city and in our lives. And Lord, we also come on this day, Lord, to first of all pray for those that have been affected by the Castleview hostage situation in Riverside just yesterday, and that you would be with those affected. We also lift up those in New York, God, as this terror attack that has taken, Lord, at least 8 lives, Lord, that we pray that you would be with the families, be with the city, be with the friends and coworkers of those affected. And God, we pray, Lord, peace for our nation. In the midst of turmoil and upheaval and all of these things, we pray for your peace in our nation, peace in our government. Lord, we pray for peace in our great state of California, Lord, and we pray for peace here. Lord, that your blessings and peace would be upon our city, be upon our government, be upon our decisions. Lord, that your peace would reign in this place. And we just thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. Okay, moving right along tonight, we'll have City Council communications and reports on regional boards and commissions. Berwin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kind of a short report tonight, but last Saturday I attended the ceremony up at the Veterans Memorial Park where Jeff donated another dog to a veteran whose dog was stolen from him back in April, and they've never found him. It was a pretty moving ceremony, but at least the gentleman has a new dog. Then on Sunday, I attended the opening of the farmers market, which looked like a huge success for the number of people that were there. And RCTC, the main item we talked about at our subcommittee meeting was completing part of the Santa Ana River Trail over in this area from Corona, Norco, through the Prado Basin, and deciding which side of the Green River Golf Course to put the trail on and join the other side of the 71 freeway over there to connect it. And I don't know how much more is going to be left to finish after that, but Brian, you remember about 12 years ago, you and I and Glenn Hedges went to Chino and attended a meeting on this particular little section. It's been 12 years, and we're finally starting to see some daylight on completing that trail, and it will be a multi-use trail, pedestrians, bicycles, and equestrians. So I'll keep you updated on that, and that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Robin?
Norco's been a very busy little town these last couple of weeks. On Saturday the 21st, I was able to go to the Cancer Walk, and Kevin was there as well. And then, as any good Norconian, I went to the dump day and got rid of some of my stuff. and then attended the medieval rodeo that evening as well. On Sunday, I was able to go over to the wheelchair basketball game. If you haven't ever been there, it is brutal and intense. It's crazy watching them play. On the 23rd, we had our unload meeting for the month of September, and at the encouragement of Lieutenant Briddick, we changed it up a little bit, and we had the meeting over at Norco High School because our goal is to actually reach the youth of the community, and so doesn't do us a lot of good for 6 to 10 mature people to sit around a table and talk about issues affecting the youth. And so I'm glad to report we had over 50 high school students attend that unload meeting and listen to a presentation by Sergeant Davis on teens and drunk driving. It seemed to be a positive experience for all those involved, and so I'm looking forward to our next one. On the 25th, I was able to go over to Norco College and attend the presentation of the Veterans Center. On the 28th, I went to March Air Force Base and attended their Veterans Recognition Program over there. It was a very good event. Mayor Newton and I attended the Hairspray musical at Norco High School on Saturday evening, so that was fun. And on the 29th, we had our farmers market opening, and I also went to the Red Ribbon Week Family Fun Festival and represented the city of Norco with Councilman Bash. We were able to talk to quite a few people, a lot of Corona residents that wish they were Norco residents, and hopefully they'll be attending like our Christmas festival and those type of events that we were advertising at that event. On Monday, also with Councilman Bash, we hiked up to Pumpkin Rock with the 100 Mile Club, and a whole bunch of people. I don't even know, I couldn't even guess how many people were up there, but parking around 6th and Crestview was at a premium on Monday. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Robin. Kevin?
You know what? I can just pretty much repeat everything she said. I'm still getting over the shock that the mayor saw Hairspray. Like, wow.
And let me interject on that in college that I did study humanities. Okay?
Whoa.
And you want a well-versed council person, Kevin.
Oh, and it was a good show.
Yeah.
And in college, you use hairspray.
Yeah.
I attended the
Jill.
I went to everything she talked about. I went to the veterans thing on Saturday. That was really cool. We put up 2 people. I think our people were right up there. But they were there's so many veterans out there doing cool stuff. 100 Mile Club, Red Ribbon Day. The wheelchair basketball tournament was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And the best moment was there was a wheelchair basketball team from Balboa, U.S. Naval Hospital, San Diego, and they were playing a Rancho VA team. And they've lost legs, they've lost arms, they've lost hands. There's one guy that, it's kind of a funny story, but not funny. He had an eye that kept rolling back because he lost an eye, but there was something in the middle of the eye, and you're like trying to look at the other eye. And then his wife comes over and says, "See my husband's eye?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "It's got the Marine Corps emblem on the pupil." So it was just like amazing. But they didn't say break, they didn't say Wolfpack, they said USA when they broke. And I was really amazed by that. Star meeting once again. You got a great staff over there, Brian. They're doing such a good job for the seniors. We've added a couple of excursions. They're going to try to get to the veterans art thing that's happening at the Norco College, so they're excited about that. And they're also going to try to go to the Stater Brothers opening, and because there's all kinds of free stuff that they give people, so I was pretty excited. I'm easily amused. I thought that was very exciting. Other than that, I pretty much went to everything that Robin went to, and Greg. Well, it's funny, as we're going, we're like waving at each other because we're all trying to get to events. And be sure to try to go to the farmers market this Sunday. It's the second weekend that's important, according to the guys putting it on. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. Ted?
Okay, well, I'm not going to bore you with everything that they all went to because I went through too, but LAFCO, no reportable actions in our area. They're working on the Skyline project as close as we are up in the Corona area. As far as the RICWA meeting, Director Blas and I met and went up there, And interesting that their budget shows a little extra in there, so maybe we'll get something back, but I kind of doubt it, because every time there's extra, they always find other ways to spend their money. So we'll know in January when they come back with their final audit is how much extra they have. So we can't count our chickens before they hatch, because we're not going to get any back. Attended the legislative hearing for the veterans with Assemblywoman Cervantes up at the college, and also the flag raising ceremony there. Let me read to you, and this is for the college and the kudos there for the veterans. This is from a homeowner that lived in the area. I'm a homeowner who lives down the street from the Norco campus. For exercise, I walk past the college campus almost nightly. I want to thank you, and this is to Dr. Reese, for installing the beautiful flagpoles and flying our armed forces, state, and U.S. flags. In today's environment of disrespectful athletes and Hollywood elites, I want to thank you for showing respect to our country and its brave military men and women, and I'm thankful for your decision and honoring to be an American. So for Mr. Roberts, thank you very much. As a veteran, I appreciate that. And as a veteran, as the chairman of the Veterans Committee, I want to all welcome you and invite you to come to November 11th at the Veterans Day ceremony at the Veterans Day Plaza at 10 a.m. That's a Saturday. You have no excuse for not coming out there and partaking in that ceremony. Also, the mayor and I met with Waste Management today on the Manure to Energy program, and hopefully they'll come back in December, January with their final report, or a good report for us as they clean they try to clean up their mess, our mess too, with the manure. So that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ted. Let's go ahead and move into item 2, City Council consent items.
Move to approve.
Second. Oh, excuse me.
Cheryl, I'm
Mayor,
sorry.
Yes, I would like to pull item 2A.
Correct. Do we need a motion and a vote on pulling that, or just?
No, I just need.
We want to just pull it off?
Motion and a second to approve the remaining items, if no
Okay.
other items are being pulled.
Do you want to change your motion a little bit?
There's a card on 2C.
Make sure.
Okay, so let's pull 2A, 2C, and we have a motion to approve the rest. Do you have the card, Cheryl?
I do have 2 cards
Same item?
on 2C.
Okay.
Okay, if the council would please vote on the approval of the consent calendar. That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Item 2A.
Yes, Mayor, members of the City Council, I'd like to request to have item 2A continued, the approval of the minutes for the next meeting on November 15th.
So moved.
Second.
Please vote on that item. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item 2C.
I have 2 cards on that item. Would you
Okay.
like to hear that first? Or?
Yes, please.
Jody Weber.
Hi, Jody.
Hello. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I just have a few points to make. As I had raised this issue previously and going along with the theme of potential discrimination for tonight's meeting, I had raised the issue before that when you're looking at the large vehicle parking building with a maximum allowable size at 1,000 square feet. I had raised the issue before in comparison to the animal keeping shelters for large animals that I felt that it was unfair for you to actually consider use in making a determination of size. What I do note that this is a process of review and a status review on the accessory buildings. There are 3 pending still. What I would like to ask in your next review, if you intend on doing another review of these particular regulations, is that you consider whether there are any pending review or applications for large accessory structure buildings that were pending, so to speak, that are in excess of the current one, and whether or not the application of the regulations will end up resulting in a denial based solely on use. Because again, we've talked about this before, when you look at the larger animal keeping structures, you're permitting structures that are up to potentially 1,400, 1,500 square feet, and you're discriminating against the individuals who don't have animals and only allowing a 1,000 square foot maximum on the square footage, but yet you're only doing that based on use, which I've always felt in the manner in which these regulations were previously adopted was unfair to consider against animal keeping individuals versus those that desire to build structures for a different purpose. So as part of your process and review, I would like to ask that further details be provided regarding either pending applications or those that are denied, and whether they're denied based on size and use. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
Joy Chase.
Hi, Joy.
Hey, how you doing today?
Good.
I came up to talk because I was concerned about, am I short? Yeah, I think I am. Sorry about that. I was concerned about the provision that some accessory buildings should be exempt from having reviewed because they were tough sheds of the kits, and they were between 240 and 280 square foot. And the reason I'm concerned about this is because if you take like a 15 by 15, which is about 225 square feet, or 16 by 16, which is 250 square feet, that's a big piece of property. You can fit a horse in there easily. But it's not so much the building that I'm concerned about, what's going to happen if this goes through. Because normally what people do is they put concrete underneath that building. And now, because it's not going to go through the planning commission, this is the same thing that happened with the person that talked to us about where he put his building and he wanted to rearrange his animal keeping area. You can put that building anywhere and block your animal keeping area if it doesn't go through. And it's big. It's 16 by 16, where you can easily put a horse. In the case of the person that came in front of the council, the reason he did not get a permit because that building was too big, and he put it really off to the side that blocked the animal keeping. If he had moved that building over to the other end of his property, all of his animal keeping area would have been good. What's happening in Norco now, and especially if you were to approve this, is now they can put rather extensive buildings, put concrete in it, and then they can concrete as much as they want because you can't control that. So I think it's a more conservative approach to keep our animal keeping areas the way they should be, is to not to allow these buildings, because they're going to put concrete underneath this, and that's what's really hurting our animal keeping areas. In my neighborhood alone, they have a big building, and then not only did they put that big building there, but then they concreted all around it. So I think it's really important to have the planning commission even review what you consider smaller buildings, because in terms of how it affects the animal keeping, it could really make the property not viable for animal keeping in the future if they're allowed to put these buildings in, and then they can concrete all around them. So I'd like you to review that and not adopt that part of the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
No more cards on that item.
Thank you, Cheryl. Steve, can you briefly address both those concerns from Jody and Joy?
Yeah.
As far as how we're going to go, what's our next step?
Yes.
Planning Commission, and then then we also review this again in 6 months, but start with Joy's first.
Yeah, as far as the concrete, she has a point that a property owner doesn't need to get a permit from the city to pour concrete. The building size that the city council decided ought to be exempt from planning commission review was 240 square feet or smaller. Then everything larger than that would still be required to go to the planning commission for approval before they can get issued a building permit for that building. And then with regards to Ms. Weber and her comment about pending applications, we can certainly put that in the staff report. The next step, if this gets approved in concept, will be to advertise a zone code amendment with the Planning Commission for review and recommendation to the City Council, and then it will come back to the City Council as a formal presentation as a zone code amendment and public hearing on that.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Does council have any comments? Motion to approve item 2C. Yeah.
Okay, please vote.
Jump in.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Cheryl. We'll now go into item 4, public comments. Do we have any cards?
Yes, Mayor, I have one card. Bonnie Slager.
Good evening, Bonnie.
Good evening. I'm here to invite you all Saturday morning to come help us clean up a trail. The FFA kids, Robin did a small grant, and the kids are going to be cleaning up a trail, and Norco Horseman's going to be helping them. And so if you can't pull weeds or whatever, at least come over and clap for the kids while they're pulling the weeds and fixing things. We're meeting at Corridon staging area, 8 a.m. until noontime. And if you hang out long enough, you might get to go over to the high school for lunch. They're fixing lunch for us at the high school, and you know they always have good food. So 8 to noontime Saturday, meet at Corridon Staging. We're going to be cleaning the area from Corridon Staging over to Shadow Canyon, which is really a mess now. So I hope you will all come over and at least thank the kids for being out there if you can't stay and pick weeds with us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie.
That concludes public comments.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into public hearings. Item 5A and Ted. Go cry in the parking lot. Gina?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. We have a public hearing this evening regarding the authorization and of the issuance of special tax refunding bonds to refund the City of Norco Community Facilities District number 2001-1, Norco Ridge Ranch, special tax refunding bonds, issue of 2006 for debt service savings. And we have our financing team here with us this evening. Anna Zarabian, who you've met before, PhD from Fieldman Rolab. She's the city's financial advisor for this item, as well as Bradley Neal from Stradling, our bond counsel. These are leads of these teams, and Eric McKean from Stiefel, our underwriter. And Anna will come up and introduce the item.
Good to see you again.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. It's my pleasure to be here tonight again. So good to see you all. And I'm going to provide a brief overview of what we're proposing for your consideration tonight. We are looking at refunding the 2006 special tax bonds for CFD 2001-1. Just a little bit of background. The district was formed back in 2001. And then in 2002, it issued bonds for the first time to finance some public improvements and pay for environmental fees that benefited the district. And then in 2006, those initial bonds were refunded for savings. And typically, there is a trend in the bond industry that every 8 to 10 years, if the market is attractive and rates are low, you could refund the bonds again. And so 2006 has passed and we are now in 2017. The market's attractive and we're considering refunding those bonds again. They are currently outstanding in a par size of a little over 31.6 million. And so what we propose to do is refund from higher rates to lower rates. So it's a pure refunding for savings. We are not going to extend the term. The final term is September 1st of 2033. So that will be the term for the refunding bonds as well. And when you pursue refunding, your objective is to have savings in every year, not just overall. And so we looked at the savings to make sure that there will be savings in each year for the property owners, because the bonds are secured by the net special taxes that are levied on the 557 parcels that comprise this district. So the proposed refunding will have the same debt service profile as the existing bonds. That debt service profile is not level. So as a result, the savings are not going to be level every year. They are going to vary, but they will mimic the same profile, the same contour. And the savings will depend on a number of things. Number one, the size of the lot, because not each house pays the same special tax. It depends on their square footage. And then what we're providing to you tonight are just some preliminary savings amounts, but the actual savings will be locked in when we price the bonds. So I just want you to realize that these are projections at the time. But typically when you pursue refunding, you aim to have at least the 3% net present value savings threshold. That's the bare minimum. And we are looking at 12% in net present value savings, so way above the threshold. We also look at the savings dollar amount. So on a net present value basis, we're projecting about 3.8 million overall. This is net of all the issuance costs, which are paid out of the bond proceeds. And then in terms of gross dollars, we're projecting over the life of the bond issue approximately $6.29 billion overall. And as I said, the savings vary from year to year. They will start in 18-19 for the first year. And the reason for that is you have to submit the tax roll every year by the beginning of August. So for the 17-18 fiscal year, the roll was already submitted and the taxes will be levied. So you can't really generate savings for the first year. That money will be collected. But from the next next year, you can reflect the refunding savings in the new row. And so that's why the first savings will occur in 18-19. And based on current projections, we estimate that savings will range between $365 and $499 per year per parcel in the first year. And they will gradually be increasing with the life of the bond issue, reaching anywhere between $617 to $841 per parcel in fiscal 27-28, again, depending on the lot size. We calculated some average savings, and they are in the staff report, but because the contour is not level, I really don't want you to focus on the average. I want you to know the low end and the high end, really. And then, so if you have any question on the financing, I'm happy to answer those questions. But in terms of the documents tonight, you will be considering the approval of a resolution to authorize proceeding with the refunding and issuing refunding bonds. And as part of that resolution, you will be adopting several documents. The first document is called the fiscal agent agreement, and that's between the district or the city acting on behalf of the district and a fiscal agent, U.S. Bank, that serves as the custodian, if you wish, for the accounts associated with the bond, and they make sure that they pay the debt service when the special taxes are collected on your behalf. The fiscal agent report also specifies the accounts established for the bonds, the redemption provisions, meaning when can you call those bonds again, and any covenants that you commit to comply. The most common covenant is that you will be paying debt service on a timely basis. Then there is a bond purchase agreement, and that's an agreement between you and an underwriter who agrees to purchase the bonds from you and then turn and sell the bonds to the market, to investors. And the city had engaged Stifel, Nicholas and Company as the underwriter. Eric McKean is here from Stifel tonight representing them. So that agreement is going to be approved in form tonight, but it's actually getting executed after we price. So on the day of pricing, when we lock in the rates and we verify that the rates are what we all agreed on, and give the green light, the underwriter will sign in the spot for the underwriter's signature, and then the city will sign on behalf of the district. And that will be solidifying the agreement that, yes, we agreed on, we locked in these coupons and yields, and this is the deal now. Stifel, you own the bonds, and then it's up to you to sell the bonds. We agreed on a purchase price, you give us this purchase price, and we move on. Then there is a preliminary official statement. That's really the disclosure document. It's, if you wish, think of it as a thick book explaining the nuances of the credit, the district, the homes, what type of homes are there, and how long the bonds go out for. And then there's a continuing disclosure agreement, which is an appendix to the preliminary official statement. And that's an agreement that the city enters into to provide on an annual basis continuing disclosure related to the district that investors like to know. And they just are mostly focused on, okay, are you paying the debt service and are there any delinquencies? Because, again, remember, the bonds are secured by the net special taxes levied on these properties. And the last document is an escrow agreement, and that's an agreement between the city and U.S. Bank again, and it just explains how the bonds we are refunding are going to be refunded, what escrow accounts are being created, and what are the requirements to retire those bonds. And so that concludes my presentation. In terms of next steps, we are if we get your approval tonight, we're hoping to enter the market next week. We just secured a rating from Standard & Poor's on the bonds. They affirmed the BBB rating with a stable outlook. We went out and requested bond insurance bids because your existing bonds were also insured. We got 2 very attractive bids, and we're selecting the lowest bid. And then we, just like the existing bonds are, we're going to have debt service reserve fund funded as part of the new bonds, and that is going to be satisfied 50% in cash and 50% through a surety policy that's provided by the bond insurer. And a lot of other credits either forgo a reserve fund altogether, or very often funded with 100% surety. However, this is a land secured credit. There are delinquencies sometimes, and it's more prudent to keep to a cash component. And in discussing that with staff, we are all in agreement that that's the way to go, and you should be conservative, fiscally conservative, and have part of it in cash. So if we get the approval, we are hoping to pre-price next Wednesday, at which time Stifel will give us preliminary proposal for the bonds, and then we'll open an order period on Thursday morning, and depending on the demand and the orders that we will get, we will finalize the pricing that morning, later that morning on Thursday, at which point we will lock the rates. We're going to close the bond issue in early December, and the bonds are actually called in March, because these bonds are callable on any interest payment date. And since we're closing within 90 days of their call date, this is a current refunding, and it's important to you that it's a current refunding because it keeps your flexibility in the future to refund again if you wanted to do that. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you. Good report. Council, have any questions? I have 2. Earlier in your report, you quoted a quantity of lots, properties.
Yeah.
Would you give me that number again?
557 homes.
557.
Yep.
Okay. And then you mentioned the rating, I mean, as favorable. Does that have like a bond rating like A, AA, AAA?
Yeah, so the highest rating is AAA. But for land secured districts, it's really difficult to get a rating. And so very often land secured districts have no rating. There are many unrated CFD bonds being sold out there. Your 2006 bonds had a BBB rating, which is actually pretty good for a land secured rating. And when we went to S&P, which is the rating agency that is the most knowledgeable of land secured credits, we presented the credit again, and there are a couple criteria they focus on, one of which is the value to lien ratio. They look at the assessed value in the district and how that compares to the bonds that were issued by the district, but also any general obligation bonds that are overlapping that territory, and they calculate the ratio. And sometimes they have very unreasonable demands on what the aggregate ratio needs to be, which explains why so many districts are typically non-rated, because they like to see the minimum at least at 20-1. In our case, we're at almost 12.6-1 without the overlapping general obligation debt, and almost 11-1 with the overlapping debt. So we're good, but we're far away from the 20-1. And so, but if you drill down amongst the 557 units and you focus on each unit's value to lien, most are over 15-1 or over 10-1. And so the individual components are very strong. And so that's what helped us solidify the BBB rating.
Good, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gina, any other speakers on presentation? Okay.
Thank you. So I would request that you consider adopting the resolution approving the moving forward with the refunding and the documents as presented.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing. Do we have any cards on this matter?
No cards on this item, Mayor.
Close the public hearing and bring it back for any discussion. I have one question. This may go to John or Brian. So on the 557 lots that are in the, and I know this is on refunding bonds, but we have 576 or 578 lots in that area. And I'm specifically talking about like Cox.
Okay, yeah, we're not,
but it's, I know this is all bonds.
Yeah, no, the LMD and this are unrelated.
Okay, so, but those entitled lots aren't affected by this at all?
Not if they're not leaned, no.
Okay, that's all I wanted to make sure of.
I
Yeah.
think I can answer that question
You know the
too.
ones I'm talking about, that,
Maybe not specifically all of them, but in reviewing the credit from 2006, I noted that there were a few additional lots. However, those lots decided to prepay their special tax obligation, and so they are not part of the district.
okay,
So that's why.
good. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay, please vote on this item. The motion carries 4-0.
Thank you, Cheryl. Do you think we ought to ask Ted back, or
I like it.
what do you guys think?
Ted's watching,
It's good?
watching the baseball game.
Okay, let's move into item 5B.
What is this?
5-0 top of the sixth.
I'd like to ask Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman to announce the score of the ball game.
No, I'm in depression.
Well, let me help you out. It's top of the sixth, and it's Houston 5-0. Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Item 5B, Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is one that we've been working on for a few months. In the budget process for 2017-18, we had discussions about the trail fence replacement projects we want to do for this current fiscal year. Staff made several recommendations of locations to do at that time, and council elected to make a request of staff to take back those requests and go and work with the Streets, Trails, and Utilities Commission to consider potentially doing California as an improvement project. And that improvement project was not just for trail fencing, but the trail itself, because of the current condition of that trail, and the fact that it is one of our major roadways, aesthetics, et cetera. So there was a desire to see what can be done to improve California. So staff took that item back to the Streets, Trails, and Utilities Commission and had a lengthy discussion about the issues related to what needs to be done on California and what needs to be done to accomplish that goal, if the end goal is to have what is our current standard of an engineered trail. There are a lot of logistics issues with making California an engineered trail. And I'll go over those in a second. Primarily, the issues that we highlighted is the current impacts that are happening on California related to runoff from from the hillsides above that come all the way from Crestview and above there. So we get a lot of rain and debris and mud that impacts through that community between Crestview and California, and then through California and onto some of those other side streets. So which has caused a lot of the erosion and damage that we currently see now in that trail area. In fact, many of the residents have actually rutted out the trail purposely just to control the water so it flows by their home and goes to the next nearby area, hopefully, and bypasses their property. So there's been a lot of improvements done by the residents themselves to survive the issues that are occurring. In the meantime, staff has been working with flood control on several projects to try to help really reduce the impacts to the flooding and the material that's occurring as up above Crestview and coming through that property all the way down to California. Two of those projects are described in the staff report, meaning it's the NA-1 project. It's a large retention basin that's going to be done on Crestview, which we talked to about the previous council meeting. And then we also have a storm drain project that's being done on California, just south of 8th Street. And those are two projects that are currently ongoing. One of those is a project that staff is working on, which is the one that's on California. So we are currently have that one under design and hope to have under construction this current fiscal year. The other project on Crestview is, again, something we're trying to determine and working. We have a meeting set up with flood control and the county supervisor's office and the city staff, and a couple of council members are going to be attending to meet tomorrow to actually have that discussion about what is the timeline for that project on Crestview. So with that, those are the two primary projects that we emphasize as staff we would like to see get in prior to doing improvements on California, because we want to see what impacts those improvements have on California. Does it pretty much negate the issues, and we can then look at just complete project as far as how the trail can be improved, whether it's to the city standard or something less than that. And when I say that, it's because the issue with creating a trail that meets the current city standard is maintenance afterwards, in that it's hard to maintain a trail that's really not framed in place, meaning you have the road edge and maybe a curb and gutter plus the property on the other side. If it's road edge and then a little bit down angle for the trail and then down into the property, which is many of the properties in California, meaning it slopes from east to west, that's where your flow is going. That's where, and it's very hard to maintain that compaction and of the DG that would be there. It'd be rutted away. That water's still going into the resident's home. So is the debris from the trail. So part of our concern was, one, deciding what type of trail we're going to have. Right now, we only have one established standard, but part of the discussion we're looking to have with the STUC committee is looking at the other trails we have in the city and what condition they're currently in and what we can get them to if funding ever became available. And that's a larger discussion, because we do have these maintenance issues on the trails, that some of these trails may never be an engineered trail, as we call it, but it still is a trail. And then deciding what that lesser maintenance would be and how we would maintain that. And that's some of the issues that we're working on with the STUC committee. We're currently have almost completed, actually, a complete inventory of the trails in the city, classifying by the actual condition they're in, so we can have some accurate information with the STUC committee. Say, here's the trails that we think we have, what we're describing them on as engineered, non-engineered, just really dirt parkway, backyard trail, and then really kind of and have some quantities on those. What's there? Does it have trail fencing? What type of trail fencing, et cetera? So we want to be able, again, future-wise, have a meaningful discussion with the committee to talk about future projects, which trails should be improved, is just trail fencing, how much trail fencing do we need to replace overall to go from wood to vinyl, et cetera. So this first level of work will be something we want to bring back to the committee and have that long discussion with them about getting them up to speed with that. Part of that is California, is as an example we gave the committee, is California is not unique in its condition. Many of the homes on this east side of the city have this grade that goes away from the street, and so we just want to be aware of if you're going to raise the grade of the trail to put it at or above the street level, you're now creating a bigger differential on the homes, which creates issues with their driveway approaches coming in, potential retention, not basins, walls that we need to put in to kind of frame in the trail, or we just build a lower trail that's below the road edge, but it's flat, that we can maintain. But then you have issues with what we have in other streets is where vehicles get off the road edge, their tire grabs it, all of a sudden they're sliding out and getting in accidents because the road edge isn't parallel, isn't even. So one thing I do want to convey, again, regarding California, we certainly and absolutely could do the trail fencing. It can be done. We're concerned with putting the trail fencing in now without doing the improvements to the trail that we ultimately decided we may or may not want to do, is there's a high likelihood that trail fencing has to be removed again in order to grade it properly, again, depending on what we do. And it's an if, but not having a determination of what we're going to do with the trail at this time makes it difficult. So I'd hate to put in an infrastructure that eventually I have to take back out and put back in again. So that was our general concerns as staff of going right now and doing California. We certainly can have the discussions, continue on the discussions about California, do the engineering and design, determine if it's possible to engineer California's trail as an engineered trail, or it just simply has to be some lesser, I guess, standard. What that would mean as far as maintenance and upkeep, because again, the idea is to have a good expectation of once we do any improvements, how you expect them to be maintained on a continual basis. So we want to have a good understanding and recognizing the reality is we're not going to have engineered trails for every location. So let's develop what that lower scale would be and how we're going to maintain it on a consistent basis, again, assuming the funds are there for that maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of caveats. So with that said, our recommendation to the STUC committee was to not move forward with any trail improvements at this time because of wanting to get the storm drain improvements in, primarily to see what their impact would be and determine if other improvements need to be put in place on California to remediate any other issues that weren't mitigated with those other storm drain projects. Because then once that's done, we feel we're kind of in a better place to judge what really we need to do, and we're not going to get wiped out every year on the trail. So our recommendation was not to move forward. The STUC committee had an extensive discussion about that and the issues resolved and involved in that in improving California. Ultimately, they did vote 4-1 to not move forward with the California improvements on the trail at this time. They'd like to get the agreed with staff's contention to get the storm drain improvements completed in order to do a proper evaluation of what can be done, needs to be done after that. After that discussion, we did have additional discussions about, well, what trails should we do with the funding we still have? Staff brought forward the projects we originally recommended to the City Council during the budget hearing. We reviewed those projects with the Commission. There was discussion about other locations that might be possible, and again, staff's recommendation focused on primarily locations that already had curb and gutter. That way it basically be a complete trail, something that was already engineered, and we're just finishing that last element, which is the trail fence. I did not look at locations that were still potential candidates for other types of upgrades we might do. Again, I'd hate to put in a trail fencing on a trail that we may actually go through and engineer in a future date. Again, if funds become available, we start a more aggressive program improving our trails. I just don't want to waste the resources. So with that discussion, again, the commission agreed 4-1 to move forward with those trails that staff recommends, where trail fencing should be replaced. And those are listed in the staff report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding those selections that we came up with, or any other alternatives the City Council may want to recommend.
Thank you, Chad. Does Council have any questions of staff?
Mr. Chad, on your discussion on California, and I've been listening to you, I guess there were no options on a temporary fix for California made.
Again, when you say a temporary fix,
I mean fixing the existing trail fence that's there.
No, because we're trying to not put wood back in.
I understand that.
But again, it doesn't mean we can't. We just didn't focus on as something temporary. We just never even came up as a topic.
And during your discussion on California, I noticed you put in your route that is a 40-mile-an-hour zone. Most of the other streets, 25 miles an hour zone, except for 6th Street. And it's a truck route, just like 6th Street. So did those factors come into possibly temporarily fixing that street in your discussion with the Streets and Trails Commission?
Not as anything temporary. I think we were focusing on the permanent fix.
On the
as
permanent
not
fix,
temporary.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. In your discussion, and I see it was done on August 7th, did River come into that River Drive?
No.
Any of this discussion?
No.
About spending any money to fix the areas where all that, the road grind got put in to fix that trail back up? I know it wasn't an engineered or designated trail, but nothing in that area at all.
No, not this time, because it mainly because staff was not prepared to talk about what it would take to do a trail on that section. So it's going to take more discussion because, again, we're doing a road improvement on River. We need to look at what type of improvements need to be done on that trail, what would need to be done. It's a larger discussion at the time as far as we just weren't prepared to talk about River Drive as a specific project.
Okay, and then finally on the 6th Street, and when we brought this before, you intended to put the white rail fencing on both sides, one side only. And what is on that 50,000? Is that included on both sides where it already is both sides? You know what where it's both sides of the trail?
No, it just includes one side. The
One side of the
trail
trail.
fence would be removed.
So if there was an interior fence rail, that would not be replaced.
It would be removed.
Removed, but not replaced.
Not replaced, no.
Okay, that's it for right now, Mr. Mayor.
Streets and Trails Commission was okay with removing the interior trail fence on 6th Street?
We didn't have a second discussion on it. If you may recall, the previous time we approved 6th Street, the commission was okay with the removal of the inner fence and not replacing it. So it just never came up as additional topic to talk about it again. But we did point out and could have reviewed 6th Street, but there was no discussion about the inner trail fence.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Robert?
Well, and I had that one highlighted as well because I don't think we ever made a decision that we wanted to take out the wood fence on 6th Street because of that it still looked halfway decent and that it had the interior and exterior. And I remember talking pretty extensively up here about, whether it was to be kept or not kept, and I don't feel like there was ever a final decision on that particular piece of trail being made.
No, there wasn't as far as, at the time it was a debate whether it needed to be done, and it was a desire to do something that was more needed, which is California. Staff is just keeping it in there in that we believe there is a need to replace trail fencing on 6th that is not the condition that folks think it is and should and can be replaced. But we're happy to not do it and move those dollars to some other location. It's just that section has already started getting white trail fence. As you know, Valley City Fence has it in front of it. It's just starting that section and moving forward, at least on a part of that street. But we don't have to do it. We kept it in there as a recommendation as it could and use the white vinyl fence. But there certainly can be other areas that you feel is a higher priority, and that's okay.
Okay, and the only other comment that I have, I feel like there's so much work to be done when we look at our trail system in town, and I understand there's not the money there, but in the field that I'm in, we always have a plan because you never know when money's going to show up, and so I feel like we probably need to be making better use of that committee and having these plans in place so that if for some reason money does fall into our lap or something happens, that we're prepared for that when it comes. And we have a committee of people that have volunteered their time to work on some of this and maybe take some of the burden off of staff and do some of this work. So I would just ask that maybe we look going forward at utilizing that committee a little more than we have in the past.
One last question, and I'll take this one example, Sierra Avenue from Detroit to 6th Street. Replacing that trail fencing, at that same time, do we come back in and refurbish the DG at all?
Yeah, I mean, we would
in
take
these
out trail
budget
fencing,
numbers?
we would level it off, we would add DG as needed, but we wouldn't take out 4 inches and then come back with something new, but we would certainly...
We're going to sweeten it up.
Bring it up to the standard, again, because we want to maintain it as that, yes.
All right. Any other questions for staff? This is a public hearing. Do we have any cards on the matter?
Yes, Mayor. Bill Naylor.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, Council. I would really like to thank Chad for the presentation that he made. It was a very good presentation, both before the council and the commission. As indicated in the report, the commission did vote to go along with staff recommendation, but there was a minority within the commission that did have some concerns, and actually it was myself, based on the residents that came to the commission meeting and raised some concerns. They really, as they've indicated to me, have talked to most of the council about California and the need to do certain things along California. I agree with Chad that there's a lot of work that needs to be done because of the flood control issues and things like that. But again, we need to do something there for the protection of the people that do use that area. But when the commission voted not to do that section of California, but to see where else we could use the funds that we were originally planning on using on 6th Street, or at least the council that originally approved some time ago, there was a number of other areas that got looked at. And again, the only reason that I was in the minority really on this, and I think that all of our trails, ideally, if we had unlimited funds, should look pristine, graded, DG, white fencing, the whole works, but we don't have that funds. So we have to make some decisions for priority, or prioritize our decisions on what we want to do. A lot of the areas that were in the report that was approved by commission are in areas that are not overly or really heavily used and already do have a nice footing, curbs on both sides of the trail. It's a very definite idea that there is a trail there, and it's not necessary at this point to use fencing. Ideally, yeah, we'd put fencing in, but again, since we have only a limited resource, it was felt that other areas might be considered, and one of the other areas that was recommended, but again, did not get voted upon because we couldn't get a second on it, was to look at the possibility of replacing the fencing along 5th Street from Corridon up to Hamner. Again, very, very visible place within the community. We do need to make sure, as the council has indicated in the past, that we do everything we can to help improve our business areas and high traffic areas so that it's encouraging for the residents to come in, or not residents, but people from outside to come in and spend their tax dollars here in town, because again, that's going to give us more money overall. So again, I just wanted to explain the reason why the difference in the vote. I think there's some real good cases made for both sides, but again, because there's limited resources, I think we need to be very careful where we spend that money. And maybe we can even hold it back now and decide. And again, one of the councilmen said we have River Drive to look at, and where are we going to get funding for that? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Bonnie Slager.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. I would like to encourage you to withhold some of this funding for the possibility of River Drive. I know that it's supposed to come up to the next Streets and Trails Commission meeting to become a dedicated trail, and I would like to see that there be some money. Hopefully it will become a dedicated trail. We've been trying to do that since Berwin was young. I can say that because I'm the same age, Berwin.
Long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And I don't think it's going to do that much. My recommendation for River Drive would be some of it that's really wide, since residents park there, is to have trail between the chain link and maybe put some big rocks to delineate the trail and still leave some area for residents to park, because a lot of residents do park on that side. So it wouldn't be the traditional trail to Chad's trail standard, which is different than mine. But we really need to do something. River Drive still has big chunks. I rode on it today. Clyde really hates it, and he reminded me today how much he hates it. And so I hope we can use some of our $220,000 towards improving River Drive. And just as a reminder, Hillside by the high school, I know that some properties have been for sale there, and it seems to be very fuzzy where there's a trail on Hillside by the high school. And as these properties sell, I think people buying now ought to know if there is or isn't a trail in front of their property. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
That concludes comments.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to council for any discussion. Berwin?
No, I'm fine with the report.
Robin?
I'm kind of wondering if we can't take number 4 and put that money aside for River Drive. Just a suggestion.
Ted?
And this is from Mr. Hammontree, who lives on California and has been to your meetings and stuff. He couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to read this. I beg your ability to do that. I hope the council will decide to keep the money for California and at least replace a large missing of the sections of trail fencing to keep traffic from driving on the horse trail and give trail separation from the street. Just doing that would help with the safety issues, but I still don't understand why a fence can't be put up along California since the drain project is years away and from my understanding only affects some of the area and not all the street. Also, we don't need a Taj Mahal of horse trails to be built before the new fencing goes up. We just need a usable and reasonably safe trail. And this is from Jim Hammontree. And I say that because that trail is heavily used. And I agree with Robin. The reason when we did the CUP, and I didn't want to go through all those trails before, was that $220,000, something was going to come up. And I didn't want to designate at that time funding when something would come up the year that we're going to use this limited funding. I still believe we can cosmetically and maybe fix California with the existing wooden trail fencing that we have, especially since we're going to be pulling out of LMD4 a lot of linear feet of trail fencing and posts that can be used in that area and we put up until we can get the thing permanently fixed. I think it is a safety issue for the riders that ride on California and for the residents that live there. I'm not real interested in fixing 6th Street at this point when we have other streets that need it more myself. So I think because if we don't try to fix California, those people have been living with that mess for years. And I can't approve any of these until we come up with a plan to fix California this year, do something cosmetically, and at least make River back to where it should be so you can ride on it. We said when we did it, and I know that we talked about putting the road grind there to fix the washout and the mud that was there to make it easier so we wouldn't have those problems in the winter. But we need to fix that trail, and there are ways you can engineer that trail so that will stay there and that DG will stay in place. And we don't need, again, like Bonnie said, we don't need an engineered trail, but at least a designated place for those riders to ride along that road way to go to the river, because that was their major thing. So, thank you.
Kevin?
On 6th Street, I really like how 6th Street looks. I realize we talked about the white fencing, but I think right now it looks beautiful. I am concerned about the danger aspect of it. We did have a kid get killed by one of those posts once, some baseball player some years ago. Went right through the car and essentially gored him. But I like how 6th Street looks. In terms of California, tomorrow we meet with Tavoloni, and I realize I get the politics and I get that we can't really force the county to do things. But I think that given the problems that we have with Crestview down to California, I don't want to vote for any of this until I know what I'm going to get tomorrow. I really want to. I'm talking to John Tavaloni. He says, "Why aren't you guys doing this project?" So I don't know if he's just talking out of his hat or what, but I'd like to find out tomorrow if, in fact, we can get this project done. If so, I'd like to save some of this money. I too want to get California fixed, but I also don't want to put a Band-Aid on it. I want to find out if we can get it fixed. River Drive, I think we can take some portion of this and do River Drive as Ted suggests. I think that's a good idea. And I'm going to use this opportunity one more time. I really believe, sorry Brian, but I really believe that the trails should be under Parks and Rec. They are part of our trail system and part of our park system. Large lots to trails to open space. And I think that at some point, Bonnie, I'm hoping that down the line we might be able to pull somebody out of Silver Lakes and actually fund that. But I really believe that without those trails, you don't have anything. And so I once again would like this council, if we can, to move those over to Parks and Rec. But for me right now, I don't want to spend any of this money except some money on River. I'd like to leave that money till at least we find out tomorrow if in fact we can actually get the Crestview to California project done. I think that we've waited long enough, and again, I just think to politely push for that project because it needs to get done. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. You're going to get 5 different directions, I guess.
That's okay.
What Robin brought up on 6th Street, I could see holding off on 6th Street right now, and assuming these are just budget numbers, there's no fixed cost to this, to kind of see more of a developed plan on the direction we're going to go on 6th Street. The first 3, Bronco, Arapahoe, and Sierra, especially Sierra, I don't have any problems fixing those trails in this budget proposal that you have. That funding, if we could lay that off from 6th Street, I agree that we need to do some temporary measures on California, whether it's wood rail, replace the missing, whatever, until we find out where we're going to be with that storm drain project. But even if it started tomorrow, it's still a couple years down the road. But let's temporarily fix what we have there. River Drive, we should have already done something. So I won't use the terminology that I want to say, but I want to see something done like yesterday on that. Your idea with the grindings was great, but we should have come right behind there with DG, and whether it was rocks, wood fence, vinyl fence. That situation's festered way too long on that. So to, I guess, find a consensus of...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I like where you're going with that. Can we right now, part of what I don't like about this is we're still patching trail together, but what I like about what you said is, can we right now make an area a trail? I mean, right now, can we say that's now a trail and we're now going to treat? So we just...
Probably some dedication rules that we probably can't, but John, did you want to weigh in on that?
Guys, too, we don't know I don't know what property in particular you're talking about.
We're talking about River, where we where it did a good job. I mean, it looks good, but the point is that it's not really a trail, so we're going to put money into a trail system. So do we need to make sure we dedicate it as a trail before we designate money to it? That's my question, I guess. But I like the idea very much.
The answer to that question is no.
Use your mic, John.
It doesn't need to be a designated trail in order to put money, as long as it's public right of way.
Well, I'll support that. And I'll support some repairs on California too, but I think we need to really push for that storm drain project.
Do you think $50,000 could get you some mileage on temporary California repairs and River Drive. Well, it'll get you somewhere. I don't see River Drive as being that big of a cost.
As far as, let me take California first.
Okay.
Could we do the repairs and just put wood in? Sure, absolutely. Would the 50,000 be enough to fill in gaps? Sure. Probably might want to work with Brian on the LMD area, try to grab as much wood there, and we reduce our cost. So it's more mainly just paying for labor to get it done. River Drive, with all respect, isn't as simple as you think it is, because it is impacting those homeowners that are right there. It's not a trail to them. It is an issue because they park there and they get in conflict with those people who are using it as a trail. So I'm just want to make sure in this process as we do it, and it's okay if we end up making it a designated trail, but there's also been discussion about those homeowners are upset is that they want parking. And there's been discussions as far as engineering design of maybe widening the road so it's going towards the river so they have parking along their property rather than along the edge where the trail would be. So now you can give them parking in front of their home. The space that's left on the riverside would be just trail and nobody could park in there. You're not going to get the trailers, mobile homes that park in that area that just want to look at the view and hang out overnight. So there's a discussion, and if we're going to do those in that way, and again, that's just one thing we could do, because I'm trying to balance not just folks who use it as a trail and want it to be improved because they didn't like the grindings. I'd hate to just throw 4 inches of DG out there and say it's good, and it just gets washed away or worn away by vehicles, etc. I'm concerned about if you're putting rocks out there, is that become potentially a hazard for vehicles who don't see it at night because it's not lit, and all of a sudden they're smack into a rock that wasn't there that they didn't know about, and now we're in some sort of liability. So I just want to make sure that and I'm not trying to delay anything, I'm just trying to make sure we diligently talk about the issues for everybody's perspective, the homeowners there, what they'd like to see happen, what they already experienced, what they don't like, and versus what the horse riders want, and accommodating them, providing a good surface for their travel through that area. So could I just go out there and throw a bunch of DG on there? Sure, but I don't think that's the wisest decision in the long term of what we'd like to see is a good long-term functional trail, at the same time taking into consideration those folks who park over there and you need it because they have nothing in the road itself to do that. So that's just some of my basic concerns that I haven't yet had a chance to talk with the STUC committee with yet. And
I think we should go forward with Streets and Trails Commission, that discussion, okay? Taking into consideration what you've said, and it's all well-based, we should have already had that discussion, and we should be moving forward with some type of plan on River Drive. I do take exception to some of your comments, though. I understand the residents that live there. They should be entitled to some of the parkway, all right? But your one comment about, people that want to, spend the night there, I think I have a problem with that if I live there. So my question's either going to be to Steve, to Eric. The guy that's living in the RV at Corona and River, has he been hauled off yet and towed away? It's still there. So we got a guy that's been living there for over a month in his RV. Is that right away or trail or whatever? But
right. One of the other issues that the reason that they filled it in was there was a safety issue in terms of people would hit that mud and stuff, and they would splash and do all kinds of things. So I do know there's a safety issue, and that's kind of why I was thinking if we dedicate it as a trail, that is part and parcel with, okay, just the things you talked about, you begin to really look at how to do that. And I totally get that maybe we should have talked about it before, but I just think that it's more complex because of the safety issue.
Mm-hmm. And that's the only reason it didn't, because literally when the issue came about River Road, or Drive, came through, it was a few weeks all of a sudden, and then I had the commission. I was not, and I'm not prepared to have that detailed discussion because I need to get with the city engineer. I need to look at the plans. I need to look at the road improvements, how curb and gutter could or couldn't be done to help control flow if we did road improvements. We're just not prepared, and I want to give them meaningful things in front of them rather than just, here's what I'm going to discuss we could do, but I'd give them something functional to look at to give a recommendation. So I apologize for it not happening really within a 2 week
And I get it. I'm not trying to bag on you on it because, I mean, beginning of the year, you and I met with a resident on River Drive, and you went out of your way to accommodate his concerns. And part of that end result was these road grindings to take care of the mud and to get the flow of that area to work towards the storm drain structure. So I get it, and I know how you're working on it, but it gets frustrating it doesn't seem that hard.
Could we strategically park the motorhome so on the right side it's trail, on the left side is road?
I guess we could ask him. I mean, he's a resident now.
It's a natural barrier. They'll see it. What color is it?
Mr. Mayor.
It's dusty.
One thing I got concerned about just jumping in there and widening all this stuff is the erosion from up under the bluff. You know, there's one area down there that's already gone again, and I remember when I moved in here, that was a horrible area down there. It wasn't safe to ride along the edge, and I'm afraid if you push the street out there, then push the trail over and give them parking over there, that's what's going to happen. That it's not going to be a safe area. And I'm like Greg, I don't think they ought to be living there, but I've rode around boats that were chained to trees and everything else down there for years. Everybody used it for their parking area. And if you was to widen the road, you'd have to get rid of the trees probably, wouldn't you?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's too good of an idea myself. But
want to move forward with these.
And is that trail, isn't there trail dedicated on one side for part of the street and the other side for another part of the street? Bonnie, do you know if...
Other side? I mean, farther east?
Yeah, I think you ride on one side for a while and then you got to get on the other side, but it needs to be looked in before we jump in there and decide to repair the whole trail.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just add one thing. One of the issues on terminology is that if you were to just make a decision to dedicate it as a dedicated trail for us is an engineered trail. It isn't anything else, and you don't have enough money to do an engineered trail here. So I think the comments and really looking at it to make sure we follow the process of what we really want, and I think the objective is to put a trail there. And one of the comments Chad made is that maybe looking at the types of trails that we have. We have dedicated trails or engineered trails, and maybe there's a soft shoulder type trail that we have a standard for. And then that Memory River Drive is a great case for that type of a trail. So I think having that sort of a discussion with Streets and Trails is going to be valuable to us moving forward. One of the other things that Public Works has done is they have actually are updating the actual trail map, and with the GIS system that we have to really layer it so that we actually have what are improved engineered trails versus those are not. And that'll be coming forward to Streets and Trails soon too. So I think we're really moving in the right direction. It's just really coming up with the strategies to put everything in place.
Okay. Anything else? Ted?
Mr. Mayor, it seems like we're going around and around in circles, and we all agree on one thing, that we have limited funds with the $220,000 in the CIP Trail Fund. And based upon that and based upon all the information, I just assume make a motion that we send this back to the Streets and Trails Commission for further work on it, and see, with the emphasis on trying to do include the river drive and some kind of a temporary fix on California.
Second. Okay.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to send this matter back to the Streets, Trails, and Utilities Commission for further work with emphasis on River Drive and temporary fixes on California. Please vote. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Cheryl. We'll now move into item 6, discussion action items. Item 6A, this is the California Voting Rights Act and formation of voting districts. City Attorney Harper.
As probably most of you are aware, on October the 2nd, the city received a letter from law firm of Schenkman and Hughes alleging that the at-large voting in the city of Norco was in violation of the California Voting Rights Act. Mr. Schenkman based that almost solely on a cursory review of the percentage of Hispanics in the city limits of Norco, and the fact that there have been no Hispanic council members since, well, ever, I guess, although he didn't go back that far. If the Federal Voting Rights Act were applicable to Norco, there would be no issue. Unfortunately, the California statute was amended essentially to shift burden to the city to show that it is not discriminatory in voting. That I'm not going to go into great detail tonight, partly because we have a demographer who's going to give a presentation about what the criteria are and what the applicability of the act is. I'm trying to say this nicely. Mr. Schenkman is known throughout the state as having sent verbatim letters to other cities demanding that they shift from at-large voting to district voting. It is the belief of most that he does that solely as a means of generating income as opposed to solving any particular problem. Given the burdens imposed by the statute, as you'll find out a little later, a great number of cities and school districts and other special districts, rather than fighting, have essentially changed the voting process to district voting. The one change in the statute which became effective January the 1st of this year has some impact on whether or not these matters actually get litigated and the cost of doing it. That is, it indicates that based upon the receipt of the letter, if a city or other agency determines that they're going to proceed potentially to enact district voting as opposed to at-large voting, that they have 45 days within which to make that determination, and then if the city decides that it's going to proceed further with the process, it has another 90 days in which to do that. The 45 and 90-day combination litigation is essentially precluded during that period of time, and Mr. Schenkman or another lawyer that might send a similar letter, assuming there are some of those, that or their recovery is limited to $30,000. As you'll see from the presentation tonight, Palmdale, for example, after litigating and losing, had to pay $4.2 million. It's essentially the recommendation of staff that, one thing staff is not are demographers, and so we've hired National Demographics Corporation, NDC, and Douglas Johnson, who will make a presentation tonight. He's done preliminary demographic work and will continue to do so. Our recommendation is that basically you receive his presentation, which is a general discussion of the statute and where he's going and where the city needs to think about going, and then consider this matter again 2 weeks from now and consider whether or not to adopt resolution indicating that we're going to go forward at least to do the investigation. With that, Mr. Johnson.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and as long as we're on depressing topics, it's 5-1 in the bottom of the 7th. So as mentioned, thank you for the introduction, and yes, I'm president of National Demographics. We have worked with just about every city that has made this transition and about half of the school districts that have made the transition, in addition to working with a whole bunch of other jurisdictions that have looked at whether they need to. As was just mentioned, this is sweeping the state. It is now, at long last, spread to the San Francisco Bay Area, which was kind of the only area that hadn't been hit by this. So actually, since I put these numbers on here, I put more than 70. We recently checked at 77 cities that have either changed their election system or are in the process of changing their election system because of this law. And just for context, before this law took effect, there were only 28 cities in the state that had district elections. So it's been a huge expansion. As you can see, I don't know if you can see the map, but put a little map in. The ones in light green shown there were in districts before California Voting Rights Act. The ones in blue are all cities that have received challenges. So the Inland Empire has been a big focus of Mr. Shankman in particular. And really, outside of San Jacinto and Canyon Lake, Norco is the last western Riverside city to not have received a letter and made this transition. So you're certainly not alone. And as was just mentioned, it's not that the 157 school districts and 77 cities are violating anyone's voting rights or violating anyone's civil rights or anything like that. This is a financial shift. There are a couple of cities, Merced being one obvious one, that were voting rights challenges and probably could have easily been challenged under the federal law long before this, but of those 200 and some, I would bet that's maybe 5. A jurisdiction that there's actually a need for representation that forces this change. The rest, it's all because of the dollar figures. That huge Palmdale settlement, the Modesto settlement was $3 million. And in both of those cases, the cities paid their own attorneys almost $2 million as well. So very few local jurisdictions in California these days have that kind of money. So we're seeing this massive change take place. In terms of timeline, if you do decide to go forward and make this change, we haven't set specific dates, but there are clear stages set up in the law. First, we have to have a couple of hearings to gather input on what the line should look like. Then the draft maps are drawn and released, and then there are more hearings on those draft maps. So even though we have 90 days to finish this, there are a lot of steps to get in that time frame. Then if you go to districts and adopt districts, those would be used for your 2018 and 2020 elections. And then the 2020 census data comes out in 2021, and those lines would be updated to reflect the new data. Now, typically, the post-census redistricting is simply adjusting lines. It's not nearly the kind of drawing from scratch that you go through at this point in time. Won't go through all these numbers. Obviously, there's a ton of numbers in here, but this is a lot of the demographics that we look at. You get total population and voting age population data, which is old now. It's from the 2010 census. Once we take the prison out, you get about almost 23,000 people. According to that census. And in particular, if you go about halfway down on the left-hand side, you see citizen VAP. That's the citizen voting age population. That's as close to a measure of eligible voters as we can really get. And so you can see Latinos are about 22% of the eligible voters in the city. And that's probably the number, with the prison version of that number, which is I think 21%, or somewhere 25%, somewhere around there, is probably what attracted Shankman's attention. And then the other data on language spoken at home, income, renters versus owners, that's data that we use to identify communities of interest and potential communities of interest in the actual line drawing process. If we do go to districts, there are two sets of rules that we have to look at. First of all is federal requirements. The ones on the left are things we have to do. We have to have an equal number of people in each district. Although we can leave the prison population out of that count. We have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which says if there's any heavily Latino neighborhoods or other protected class neighborhoods, we can't divide them in a way that dilutes their voting strength. And then no racial gerrymandering. So one of the big switches is in determining liability, all you hear about really is race, 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 because that is really the determinant of liability. When we're drawing lines, race cannot be the predominant factor. Then we switch to talking about neighborhoods and representing neighborhoods. So there's a big shift that goes from determining liability to actually drawing the lines. So those are the requirements. Then where most of the decisions come down is in traditional criteria. Communities of interest, trying to keep, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, trying to keep the lines compact, contiguous, and follow major roads to the degree possible so it's easy for voters to know where the lines are. And then looking at past voters' decisions and really trying to leave the re-election decisions up to the voters by avoiding pairing council members where possible. Again, these are the traditional criteria are goals, they're not requirements. And I always put planned future growth in gray these days. It's something that can be considered. You can underpopulate slightly an area that's going to grow more, but because these lines are going to be redrawn in 2021, it's not really an issue. That'll be much more of a consideration in 2021 if you're drawing lines for the decade. I talked about the Voting Rights Act and heavily protected class neighborhoods. As you're probably aware, there are no heavily Latino neighborhoods in Norco. The Latino population is really spread out. You can see, I should flag the one census block right along the freeway that's red, that's 75% to 100% Latino. There are 2 residents there, so both of them are Latino. Same thing with the green right above it. The only 2 census blocks that really have any real numbers of population would be the green one up at the top with the arrow pointing to it and the yellow one down at the bottom. Even they only have 100 people and I think about 60 people. And those are single census blocks right along the freeway. So there are no heavily Latino neighborhoods like we see in the Central Valley and many other places, which would kind of remove the requirement to draw a majority Latino seat that we would see in a federal situation. So with that kind of voting rights determined neighborhood or community off the table, what are we looking at communities? Well, there are 2 questions you have to ask about a community of interest. Number 1 is, what is your communities of interest in the city? It can be anything. A neighborhood is really whatever the people who live there define as a neighborhood. It can be around a park, it can be an area around a school, an area between major roads, an area along a riding path. It could be a neighborhood. Whatever the people define as their neighborhoods. There's a second key question, though, that is often forgotten in this process, which is, okay, here's our community of interest. How do we best respect and represent that community? Often the traditional answer is unite it, have it be as much of one district as possible so it has a strong say in the election of that district's representative. And that's certainly an acceptable answer. The other is, well, it still takes 3 votes to do anything. So what good does having 1 voice on the council do for our neighborhood if the other 4 aren't accountable to us at all anymore? And so sometimes, about a third of the time, we get jurisdictions that say, or communities that say, here's our community, please have multiple council members who cover areas of our community and are accountable to us. I think I've got some examples. So in wrestling with this choice, I've got some examples here because sometimes you can see it better. Glendale Unified on the left, you can see they were very much compact lines. Each community really concentrated in a given district. So you can see the north has a seat, the west has a seat, and so on. The I-5 corridor in the southwest has a seat. Keep each community together. Pasadena is the classic example. They went to districts just before they started the old Pasadena, Colorado Boulevard redevelopment and really wanted the council to all have a stake in that. They didn't want any council members saying, I don't care about that. I want my share of the city's money over here. So you see that line through the middle, that is Colorado Boulevard, and all 7 districts to this day, even after 2 redistrictings, continue to have a piece of the Colorado Boulevard in that old Pasadena area. Compton below it is they actually took the community compact approach, but it also shows how the population requirement has some funny impacts. They also have a lot of county islands, those white areas in their city. But you can see even when you want to be perfectly square, equal population numbers can make that hard to do. And Central Unified and South Pasadena are two examples of really taking it to the other end of saying we want every school board member or every council member to have a piece of each neighborhood in the city so that every council member and school board member has to answer to each area. Schools are the most common doing this. They don't want one trustee to start feeling like they own a school because they have all the students and all the parents from there. And so they intentionally divide it up. You can see Central Unified, every attendance zone in that district has 3 board members touching it. So you get funny looking lines, but for a very policy oriented reason. So I bring that up because often when people talk about communities and neighborhoods, they kind of assume they want to be united, but there is a very good question. Communities and neighborhoods still have to get their issues passed by council, and that takes 3 votes. So is it more useful to have multiple representatives on the council? And that's a question we ask as we go through this process and hold these hearings. It's which way do residents prefer? So again, this is just the start of a process and the council's eventual decision, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have, the public has, either now or after the public comments.
Does council have any questions at this time? Okay. You will be able to, if there's any residents that have questions,
yes, I'm happy
we'll have you answer them after all of that. Cheryl, do we have any cards?
Yes, Mayor. Jody Weber.
Hello again, Jody.
Hello, Mayor, Council. I don't know actually where to begin. First of all, as you know, I am and currently serve as a state commissioner on the Citizens Redistricting Commission. I was responsible for redrawing the voting district boundary lines for the entire state of California for state assembly, state senate, and Congress. And so I have quite a bit of experience in dealing with the Federal Voting Rights Act and the requirements there, as well as the California Voting Rights Act. I had an opportunity to meet Mr. Johnson back in 2011, so we go back quite a ways, and his efforts to participate in that process as well. I will vouch for Mr. Johnson that he has been the principal line drawer for, as he said, plenty of the cities and school districts ever since Mr. Schenkman and quite a few other attorneys have actually abused, I'll say it, Mr. Harper didn't, the law, because when you actually have legislation such as the California Voting Rights Act that actually provides for attorney's fees, you have, unfortunately, the abuse by plenty other attorneys, and that's what has gone on. What I am troubled by in particular, the numbers and whether or not, just because you received what I contend to be a boilerplate letter from Mr. Schenkman, I've seen plenty of other quotes from the same letters that he has given to many other cities in my brief research since this city had actually received that letter. I am troubled by some of the numbers, and I had actually reached out to my contacts at the statewide database to actually get some of the real numbers, to actually look at least briefly or introductorily, whether there could be a potential for vote dilution by the Latinos in this community. The 31% number is, as Mr. Johnson had suggested, and what I verified, is the total population number and doesn't represent necessarily the citizen voting age population. And I'm glad to see that Mr. Johnson's numbers were adjusted in accordance with the information I received, and I had forwarded to you as well from the statewide database, that if you do take out the prison, it does bring it down to approximately 22%. But as Mr. Johnson may not have said, that you don't necessarily, in a city of this nature, with the numbers that you have, you won't necessarily be required to draw, and probably couldn't draw, a majority-minority district. Corona had that issue. I mean, Corona had a centrally populous area of Latinos concentrated in compactness enough that when they received the letter, they needed to really pay attention to it and actually consider districts that could actually create a majority-minority district to actually vote a candidate of their choice, which in that case was for Latinos and Hispanics. But what I would like to suggest is that although districting is one option, and the Elections Code does provide for that, and it is the primary one that everybody has gone to, and I don't know necessarily that it is the ultimate solution, and if you'll indulge me just momentarily, I just have a few suggestions. There are other options. solutions. And I would like to encourage us to be a little bit more creative in determining that. I'm certainly aware, I think it was Santa Clarita, I think Mr. Johnson had pointed out, that the judge had considered the possibility of their other options instead of districts. And of course, that was rejected. But that's not to say that when we take a look at the actual statistics and whether racially polarized voting has occurred in the city of Norco, that there aren't other options for districts. So what I would suggest, and when we're considering this, is the possibility that Mr. Johnson could actually do a racially polarized voting analysis. He can talk to you about what it really means, but it will be the primary focus that Mr. Shankman would need in order to determine whether there has been a violation of the California Voting Rights Act. I know we're under a time pressure, and what I would like to consider is that I would like the council to consider, I understand the fiscal responsibilities for the attorney fee issue, the potential limitation of limiting those fees at $30,000 if you were to voluntarily consider districts, but jumping into those solutions without them actually being the potential remedy necessary for this city is, I think, a little premature. So if we had a little bit of time, let's take a look at what the potential impact of districting could be for the city of Norco overall, and take a look at it in the long term based on your responsibilities to protect the charter. We have particular interests in this community, and oftentimes what we have seen, when you separate, you're going to have greater polarization on certain issues. We've seen it. Accessory building regulations, primary example between the differences from the individuals in the hills versus the flatlanders, hill people and flatlanders, and NHA people and those that are not members of NHA. We've seen that polarization occur, and it could potentially occur in the long run. And Councilmember Bash, you've said it plenty of times that it only takes a few votes of council in order to potentially change this city forever. And that means taking away our options and our rights to actually own land here and actually have animal keeping rights. And that's something that we have to consider for the long term in exchange for what I understand to be necessary fiscal responsibility in considering the exposure. I'm an attorney. I completely understand what that attorney fee exposure is here. But let's take a look at, and I would fully support that if the racial polarized voting analysis that Mr. Johnson can do evidences vote dissolution or dilution, or evidences racially polarized voting in the city of Norco, I'd be the first one to stand here and say, let's take a look at solutions, and if districting will do that, then so be it. If it's not there, then I would say we should fully defend any action by Mr. Shankman. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
Bonnie Slager.
Bonnie?
Hi. All right. Right now, I vote for 5 city council members. If we do this, I only vote for 1. So right now, I've got 5 of you that I can complain to about things. And if we have districts, basically, if I talk to the other 4 of you, you will tell me to go talk to my guy.
Yes.
So, okay. Thank you.
Kay O'Mara.
Bonnie, that could also be your guy or gal. Okay.
Good evening, Council.
Okay.
Bravo, Jody. Okay, first of all, I'm just going to try to cite 3 things here, maybe a little ahead of the game. I'd like, if possible, I don't know, Jody or attorney, if this comes after the fact, but if we could possibly consider whether or not you can call for dismiss because of malicious abuse of legal process. And I would refer this action into the section code of the California Voters' Right Act 14030. I would also like to see if possibly we could get with throughout the state of California and have a referendum put on our ballot to just tweak and change the language of, again, section 14030, stating that, in fact, the prevailing party shall, in fact, collect the cost from the loser, as opposed to the attorney in his little gravy train. I would also, the reason on the malicious abuse of legal process, I think that it possibly could apply to Norco, considering Norco's population and what I've just seen from the report, which makes it even more evidential, our population makeup and the dispersed population of the Hispanic. Okay, and then I don't know if it's possible for us as a community to consider joining in the suit of the Poway group, which have joined with other cities, that in fact the California Voters' Right Act, specifically with the 14030 and 140292827, is in fact in conflict with our constitutional rights under the Federal Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act was put in effect to protect you, me, I, all of us, our voting rights. It has nothing to do with race. Yes, it was put to protect so that people would not be intimidated because of race. But it wasn't put into effect so that we might put forward a candidate that we don't even have. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
Wendy Stevens.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi. I feel like I might be confused. So this is partly because of the number of percentage of Hispanics in an area?
I guess you could address us as the question, then we'll have the question answered.
Okay. So it seems to be based on, at least in part, the percentage of Hispanics in an area that they need to be represented?
Yes,
okay,
the demographer will address it.
Okay, because when it's discussed that there isn't a really high percentage on Sierra, there is a slew of Hispanics on Sierra. In fact, I get the feeling as I go around that I like to see a Caucasian, like this, and I'm not politically correct because I'm kind of fed up with it. I'm freckled, I'm white, I'm Caucasian. I'd like to see I'm so glad that at least the council is, because there's somebody like me and I'm not in the minority. If somebody who has our values, that is Hispanic, wishes to run, I'll gladly vote them in. If someone doesn't want to maintain our values, we won't. Art, who is Hispanic, Mexican, should run for council if he wasn't busy doing other things. And we can put them in because, I would vote for him because he has the same values as you do. Heck, he put you in your seats. So I'm against this districting. I don't see any reason for it. And this thing about enough Hispanics is dumb. Thanks. Now, I'm not just a body. Now you know what I think. But it's not like I haven't come up to you before.
Thank you, Wendy.
Jeff Cahan.
Hi, Jeff.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I want to make it very clear I'm here as an individual resident on this topic. First of all, you mispronounced his name. It's not Shankman, it's Shakedownman. Okay, this guy is an extortionist. He's a bully. He knows nothing about our town. He's clearly in this, as Jody said, just for the money. He's abusing the legal process. We've done just fine for 50-plus years. We don't have an issue here. I'm tired of being called a racist. I'm tired of our town being called racist because there's some stupid law out there that somebody's going to twist and abuse for their own personal financial gain and force us to have to change how we do business in this town. We're doing fine. And I'm tired of the racial card being thrown out all the time. I'm trying to hold myself back from saying what I really want to say, but I think you understand. I realize this could cost us some money, but at some point we got to stand up to the bullies. And we got to push back, and we got to say, no, you're not coming in and telling us what to do in our town. You little snot-nosed Malibu lawyer, go home. You don't know anything about Norco, and we need to just, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Daniela Segovia.
Good evening. How are you?
Oh, recuperating from having some cardiac issues in the hospital. But I heard that our voices were needed here tonight. Curiosity question. Seeing how we've been here for 29 years, and there are very few Hispanics that are in my area of town, where is this collective group of Hispanics that she was speaking about? Where do they reside? And with this districting, does it mean that the individual that is elected, should one choose to run, hopefully an educated one, they would have to be within said district that contains a large population of Hispanics? Am I following that correctly?
I believe so, but once again, the demographer will address your question.
Okay, because in my part of town...
and John will give you a comment to that.
Okay, because I think there's probably 5 in my part of town. I honestly could really care less as to whether someone is black, brown, yellow, purple, striped. If you can afford to live in my neighborhood and be there, knock yourself out. And if not, then go rent or be someplace else. But I don't see how we can be forced to cater to a group that is virtually non-existent. And if it's so spread out where you only have a small group, you have 22%, I believe he may have mentioned, and if they're way over here and yet you have maybe 10 here, 5 here, it doesn't seem fair. But we all, at least a vast majority of us, opted to move to Norco because of our horses. When my husband changed medical centers, we weren't looking for a Hispanic area or a white area. We were looking for a place for our horses. Chestnut, black, gray, that's all that mattered to us. So just needed to throw my 2 cents in that. Or if it doesn't matter where we live and we just need Hispanics, well, I'm a college-educated Hispanic female. I could always run, but there's only like 4 other families in my area. Don't think that it would really be fair. That's all.
Thank you.
That concludes public comments.
Okay, John, did you want to comment first?
I'll comment very briefly.
Okay.
Unfortunately, what we're faced with is the distinction between the Federal Voting Rights Act and the California Voting Rights Act. There is not even an argument that can be made under the Federal Act that the city is in violation. Unfortunately, because of intentionally how the California Act was drafted to be different than the Federal Voting Rights Act, it's still not a slam dunk, but there at least is the potential that a court could find that we were. Under the Federal Act, there is one of the requirements is generally that there be a community of, we use Hispanics, but it's minorities in general, that are in a specific compact area that aren't being represented in at-large voting. That specifically does not apply in California. While that's something a court can consider, it only goes to the remedy, not whether or not you are in violation of the act. Norco has, at least the preliminary numbers are approximately 22% Hispanic. They are completely spread throughout the city. There if there is virtually no argument that could be made that there is any specific area of our community which is in which racially polarized voting exists. Unfortunately, we're faced with a gentleman and other lawyers as well. I'm bad-mouthing Mr. Shankman, kind of, but he's not the only one that does this. That the statute, I guess I can't quote what was said earlier, but under the ADA Act, the Americans with Disability Act, essentially, some of you know about it, that there are kind of a similar set of lawyers that go around driving around looking to see if they can find a business that doesn't have an appropriate ramp or that there's not access, and the sole purpose again is to to be financially recompensed for their efforts, and that's the case here. The difficulty is that the standard is so low in California that every city, almost under any circumstances, has a significant burden, and it ends up ultimately, after we go through the process of being a business decision, whether or not it's something that a city's going to go forward with. You saw the dramatic increase in numbers that have rolled over because the cost of fighting it is significant. One that isn't up there, wasn't listed, Harupa Hills. Harupa voluntarily went to district, as you probably know. They did it, however, prior to the $30,000 cap. Schenkman's bill to Harupa, which they're now arguing over, was $990,000 for having done, as near as I can tell, nothing. That Harupa did it on their own. I'm not suggesting that Harupa is going to pay $990,000, but they're probably going to end up litigating whether or not they are obligated to, because the $30,000 cap didn't exist. Highland is a city which stipulated to liability so that they wouldn't have to litigate that, and instead wanted another option other than districts, which didn't make sense in their city, and that other option was cumulative voting. The court held that cumulative voting was not an alternative which would cure a violation of the California Civil Rights Act, and awarded Mr. Schenkman $1.2 million. This is after a trial that took, I don't know, a week. This city is just faced with a very difficult decision, one that isn't being made tonight, obviously. This is the first step in a process. It's a compacted process. The council will get to make a decision at some time, presumably within the 45 plus 90-day period, assuming that they adopt a resolution to go forward at the next council meeting. But there's no commitment certainly on the part of this council as to what that decision might be. It's been suggested it may be that pound sand. Maybe that if formed districts, you're going to get to see a lot of different options about how districts could be drafted. You saw the examples that Mr. Johnson provided and how different cities have approached it. Maybe there's something that can be done, notwithstanding the lack of existence of polarized voting, that would be acceptable to the community. Not suggesting there is, but there may well be. Unfortunately, like I said, I personally don't think that under the statute that there can be a finding of racially polarized voting as is defined under the statute. But that doesn't mean that a court won't find something else, and that we're a long ways down the road. But tonight is just the introduction, and you get to hear more in 2 weeks, and assuming we adopt a resolution, then over the next 90 days, receiving additional input before council decides where they're going to go. I don't know, I probably answered all the questions, but if Mr. Johnson would like to.
Any further comments
Just one note on
or
the
answers?
Yeah. Just adding to what he said about the law does spell out alternative remedies, but none of those are a protection from a lawsuit. And so they are all, essentially, they're in there for remedies a judge could impose at the end of a lawsuit, not for something a city could do to protect itself from a lawsuit. And the other thing with the polarized voting analysis, the Latino numbers are so low in the city and they're so spread out that while I'm sure Shankman and his favorite expert could come up with a claim, there really isn't a way to do a real study, because when we look at that, we go precinct by precinct and say, okay, as the precincts get more Latino, does a given candidate do better or do worse? Well, if your smallest precinct is 8% Latino and your biggest precinct is 20% Latino, well, we don't have precincts that we can really look at much of a transition. And normally you're looking for how does a candidate do in a 10% Latino precinct and how is he doing in a 90% Latino precinct, and that tells you a big difference. We just don't have, you don't have a Latino neighborhood that would give us any real polarized voting results, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I guess. From a community standpoint, it's good that you don't have segregated neighborhoods. From my demographer's polarized voting study, it means we don't have good data to give you a reliable analysis.
And that was all the notes you had between you and John with the residents' concerns and comments?
I believe so. Oh, there was the one comment about the candidate, and yes, the candidate does have to be from the neighborhood. The law doesn't require that you elect a Latino candidate or any specific candidate. It's just that each district has to be able to elect their own representative.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Does council have any other further comments or discussion?
Just a comment real brief. As we go forward, I want to be very, very careful that we all reflect the values of this community, that when everybody else around us had segregated schools, we did not. That most of us that have lived here for a very, very long time have never noticed the color of people's skin. It's very, very important, because everything we say in this room can be heard in a court of law. We were the first city in the state of California to hire a Hispanic city manager, superintendent of schools. We had a black mayor. We have a black city manager. Nobody even notices. It is supremely important that everybody understands that everything we say is a matter of public record. And I would really hope we all reflect the values of this community that we've had for 70 years, which I believe are colorblind. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Ted.
Just to make sure, and Andy or John, at this point, the cost of this, any districting or anything we do, fiscal impact to the city, we're looking $25,000 for the consultant and $30,000 for the attorney at this point. So our minimum right now is around $55,000. Use your mic, John.
We're looking at whatever portion of the contract Mr. Johnson ends up charging, which, maybe $25,000 is accurate. And the $30,000 is not a given. The $30,000 is if we form districts, impose them ourselves. $30,000 is the maximum under the statute. At this point, I don't know that Mr. Shankman has done anything other than write the letter. I mean, I think Jody said this, that the letter is simply, he looked at what the population data was from SCAG, which is 31%, and said, oh yeah, and looked at names and said, no, you don't have anybody, so you're in violation. So, I mean, he'd have to show that he actually spent lawyer time and consultant time to get to $30,000, which I expect he probably would, but we're not obligated to pay it. He's obligated to prove to us that he's entitled to it, and then we get to argue over it.
If there's not anything else, I'll entertain a motion to agendize.
Okay, please vote.
push forward.
That motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and just take a short recess. I'm going to go ahead and switch two items due to a time constraint. We're going to go ahead and take item 6C now, and then we'll go to commission appointments 6B right after this report. So this is approval of the City of Norco biosecurity policies and procedures. Frank.
All righty.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of City Council. Before you tonight is the Biosecurity Draft Policy and Community Biosecurity Guidelines. At the request of Council back in May, staff developed a committee to create a comprehensive biosecurity policy along with 2 community biosecurity handouts that residents could use that would substantially reduce the risk of spreading disease with their own livestock at home, on the farm, or at a stable. The committee consisted of Councilmember Hoffman, Councilmember Grunmeyer, Event Facility Supervisor Ireland, California Department of Food and Ag Veterinarian Dr. Ann Eichelman, California Department of Food and Agriculture Veterinarian Dr. Alicia Olmsted, California Department of Food and Agricultural Livestock Inspector Esteban Escobedo, and Superintendent Scotty McLeod, No Ground Control Services. The committee's hard work over the last several months has led to this PowerPoint presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have after the presentation. Also, I have Supervisor Ireland here, and I'm lucky enough to have a representative from the California Department of Food and Ag Veterinarian Dr. Ann Eichelman here as well if you have any questions. With that, I'll proceed with the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, what is biosecurity? Biosecurity is defined as a set of preventative measures or guidelines to help avoid the transmission of infectious disease. Entry into a facility. So this is going to be our policy of entry into the George Ingalls Equestrian Center. Policy entry of use facility. All renters, agencies, or individuals requesting use of the Equestrian Center shall require to show proof of a negative Coggins test when crossing state lines. All equine owners must fill out a horse event participation form upon arrival and submit that. Biosecurity information will be posted at the entry booth and on a table at all events. Information will be added regarding biosecurity on the City of Norco's website, and of course that information will also be provided to clubs and agencies requesting the use of the facility. The City of Norco and the George Ingalls Equestrian Event Center personnel will enforce refusal to compete. If people don't fill out the forms for the horses, then we can say, hey, you can't come in, you can't compete and enter without a form being filled out. Policy. Entry forms collected should be turned in at the end of each event to the city's administrative facility manager. This is to have contact information on all participants in the event of quarantine is called after an event has ended. This is solely to allow contact by the state and the city should they need to notify participants of a possible exposure. Again, if people don't want to fill out the forms, stall rental agreements may be terminated by the City of Norco at any time. The horse event participation declaration will only be filled out on multiple day events, excluding rodeos. We had a lot of discussion in regards to this, and the risk is involved when you have multiple day events. When you have a horse that may be appearing healthy on day 1, but on day 3, it's exhibiting some type of sign of disease. So we're only requiring this for events that take multi-day events. We're excluding rodeos mainly because of the fact rodeos, typically like when we have our professional rodeo Diamond G, you have one contractor. Typically, they take really good care of their animals. They're healthy. We know where they're going and where they're coming back from. He may have 1 or 2 subcontractors. When you have a big event that's multi-day, you could have 50 participants from 50 different areas, and you want to be able to track them if something does break out. That way, you can do that with that event form. Again, this is what the form looks like. It's basically having contact information, who's bringing the horse, where did the horse come from, and after the event, where is the horse going? The person is to declare that the horse has been healthy for the previous 3 days and is not exhibiting any type of fever. And when they fill this out, this is a way for us to get to track an animal. If something does break out during an event, we can now contact these people and say, hey, we need to quarantine your animal because it's been potentially exposed to something contagious. And here's an example of an event that's going on. Event biosecurity. Biosecurity refers to measures taken to prevent the introduction and spread of new diseases, agents into a herd. The threats that are possible. Commingling of horses, multiple human contacts, and contaminated equipment represent the greatest threats for disease exposure and spread of horse events. Consistent biosecurity practices play an important role in reducing the risk. Even the best biosecurity does not eliminate all risk of disease exposure. However, each measure you take will reduce the potential of disease exposure and help keep your horses healthy. The California Food Department and Ag was really strong about this, saying, like, no matter what you do, you cannot eliminate all risk. There's too many variables, but what you do is by having this policy is you help reduce the risk, mitigate the risk as much as possible. Limiting the exposure to disease. Infectious disease pathogens may be brought to and spread at an event or equine livestock facility by horses, people, and domestic animals. The pathogens may be transferred through the following ways, and there's many, and some we can control and a lot we can't. Vehicles, equipment, insects, ticks, birds, wildlife, rodents, feed, waste, water. Steps to reduce exposure. The following pages show simple biosecurity steps. So we wanted to hammer home some simple steps that people can take home and use that can help reduce this risk. And this is some of the main things that will reduce the risk. Here are the steps. Limit horse-to-horse contact, especially nose-to-nose contact. If you have something that's potentially contagious, when they're touching nose-to-nose, there's a potential transmission of disease. So you want to limit that as much as possible. Avoid sharing of equipment unless thoroughly clean and disinfected between uses. So don't share equipment. Don't share equipment with a stranger. You know where your equipment's been. You don't know where somebody else's equipment may have been or what it's been on. Limit horse-to-human contact. Again, the human can be a pathogen transfer. If I go and touch one horse that's sick and I go touch several more horses, I now expose those several more horses to a potential disease. Again, good hygiene, wash hands between handling of horses, especially other people's horses. And the last one is avoid use of communal water sources. You have a large trough, you have one sick horse that drinks from that, every other horse that drinks from that now is potentially exposed to that disease. So we want to eliminate that. If you go to a show, bring your own water bucket for your own horses, don't use somebody else's or use something that's a communal source. Quarantine authority and location. This was a question that came up, well, who has the right to quarantine an animal if something does come down with something contagious? Well, it's the California Department of Food and Ag who has that right. They have the right to quarantine pursuant to Code 9562. Paragraph 3 best sums it up. The state veterinary quarantine powers set forth in this section expressly include the power to order movement, isolation, or destruction of animals or food products, as well as the power to hold animals or food products in place. So they have that authority. I don't. The sheriff doesn't. That's the California Department of Food and Ag. For some reason, I'm having trouble saying that tonight. The horse owner's residence or the animal shelter may be used as a quarantine area. Ideally, we like the horse to go back to the residence, but that call is based by the California Department of Food and Ag. If they want it done at the event site, if they want to do it at the shelter, if they want to do it at the residence, that would be their call on where to move that horse, if we can move that horse. Quarantine procedures. So this is an event that we have something break out. What are we going to do? We're going to isolate the sick animals from the healthy animals. We're going to limit horse-to-horse contact, limit stress. Stress causes things to progress quickly. Limited amount of shared airspace, so you want to quarantine that animal away from, hopefully far away from any healthy animals. You want to make sure you use whatever equipment you use to clean up after that animal is separate from what you use on healthy animals. You want to have separate feed and mucking and grooming equipment. You want to restrict pet and vehicle traffic. Again, pets, vehicles, they can be a transmission of that disease. Animals must be washed under running water. Again, good hygiene. If you're handling animals, you want to make sure you clean up after yourself. Again, consider stepping into a disinfectant foot bath before and after entering a sick animal's area of quarantine stall. Foot baths should be changed regularly. And the reason behind that is you do, say, a bleach and water solution, that degrades over time. So if you leave it in there all day, it may not be effective at the end of the day. So you want to change it regularly so it stays effective. You know that when you step your feet in there, you're disinfecting properly. Stalls should be cleaned and disinfected prior to use. All organic matter should be removed, and detergent should be used to clean stalls. When they are dry, disinfectant should be applied. Again, we're lucky here in California and in the equestrian center, we have a lot of direct sunlight on the stalls and onto areas, and that really kills a lot of the pathogens that may be on them. So that helps. If possible, there should be separate staff to handle sick animals only. Again, you don't want to become that mode of transmission. So if you can have people that are separate, that's ideal. And again, all costs associated with the quarantine process will be the responsibility of the horse owner. So let's take a look at an example of what a disease isolation unit can look like. Suspected animal may be immediately required to be confined to such a location upon directive of the show manager or any person within the chain of command of the city of Norco. This is just one example one would look like. It could be just a covered stall, as this shows, pipe corral. It could be a box stall, but again, if it's a box stall, you don't want to have horses on either side of that box stall. You want to make sure it's way away from wherever that box stall is. It can be a corner of someone's backyard where it's way away from any other animals or horses. Again, we're going to have signage as well, posting, isolation stable, no unauthorized entry. So we want to limit people coming and going, pets coming and going, vehicles coming and going as much as possible. A veterinarian will determine if the animals should be removed from the area, competition, or remain on site. The site will be large enough for the animal to turn around, lay down, and should be on solid footing whenever possible. All costs for veterinary service shall be at the owner's expense. The City of Norco shall decide if the California Department of Food and Ag needs to be contacted for further investigation and quarantine. We have a local department here in Ontario. The phone number is listed there. The owner's personal vet may be used if they're available and can respond within a reasonable amount of time. So we don't mind using a local vet here. If they're available, if they're not, then we're going to contact California Food and Ag. And let's go over, once you have that disease isolation unit, you're going to need equipment to care for that animal. And this is the equipment, and it's quite lengthy. It could be a treatment card if we have several horses that are in a quarantine. You're going to need a treatment card to go from one horse to the next. You're going to need disposable coveralls, disposable gloves, potentially rubber boots, foot bath containers, garbage bags, garbage can to put those garbage bags in, disposable plastic shoe covers, thermometers for each horse, equipment for each horse that could be drugs and sealed plastic containers, stomach tubes, twitch, whatever may be needed for that animal. You want to keep it separate so you're not transmitting anything. You want to implement a manure disposal and waste management plan. So if you're dealing with a sick animal with sick waste, you don't want to mix that in with the healthy waste. You want to have a separate manure bin for those sick animals. Again, owner, caretaker, staff, this kind of sums up the policy in general. There's a lot of people can take care of infected animals. Ideally, caretakers should not be responsible for the care of both sick and healthy animals. If it's unavoidable to care for healthy animals, it should be completed first, then exposed animals, and finally infected animals. Again, we don't want to go from sick animals back to healthy animals because then we become the potential mode of transmission of that disease. Staff will be given protective equipment to mitigate the spread of disease while caring for or in contact with exposed contagious animals. And there's some examples there of the equipment, disposable gloves, face masks, gowns or smocks. After handling sick animals, dispose of disposal gear in a designated sealed container. And again, good hygiene, wash up after you're done. We will keep a lot of this stuff on hand at the animal shelter in case a quarantine is called. So I'll have a big tub down there with disposable gloves, disposable masks, smocks, foot baths, stepping mats, all that stuff. Again, in case this is a quarantine's call. It's going to be very rare. It doesn't happen often, but we want to be prepared and have a policy in place in case something does happen. Some of the notices and postings, if this is approved, that we'll create. Here again are the tips. This kind of reiterates some of the things I just talked about on how to keep your horse healthy. Avoid direct horse-to-horse contact. That's a big no-no. Monitor your horses for clinical signs of disease and report temperatures over 101.5 to a veterinarian. Now, if there's also neurological signs along with that temperature, then you must contact the California Department of Food and Ag. They need to know because then we got something serious. We want to avoid horse-to-human, back-to-horse contact. Again, playing with a lot of horses, if one of them's sick, you become that mode of transportation of that disease. You want to avoid sharing equipment unless it's thoroughly cleaned and disinfected between uses. And again, avoid use of communal water sources. If you follow those tips, you can really dramatically reduce infectious disease in any area. This is how to be safe around animals. This is another sign we'll create. It's called the Know. Know that animals carry germs that can make people sick. Never eat, drink, or put things in your mouth around animals. Older animals, pregnant women, younger children should be extra careful around animals. The reason behind that is those would tend to be the people that have a weakened immune system. So if you have a weakened immune system and you're around something that has a disease, you potentially can get that as well, if it's zoonotic in nature. Again, good hygiene, wash your hands with soap and water right after visiting an animal area. This is another sign we'll make, and we'll put this around the restrooms or anywhere where there's a wash up, so it tells you who, when, and how to wash your hands. And this will be a metal sign that we'll post wherever a restroom or cleanup area is. That ends my presentation. Any questions?
Good job, Frank. Good presentation.
That was my first one, so.
You did good, buddy. You did good. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, member councils, the committee also worked on guidelines that are attached in your staff report. Those particular guidelines that were put together by the committee will be available to our community for their own facilities. And it gives them some guidelines and tips on how to deal with biosecurity on their own site.
Does council have any questions for Frank? No?
But not for Frank.
Okay.
All right.
Frank's presentation.
I know, but I'm going to pick on his boss. Very good, Frank, on that. And I want to appreciate Dr. Ullman, Dr. And I'm going to
Olmsted.
Inkelman. Yeah, thank you. And Robin, who helped on this, yourself and Patty and Inspector Escobedo, because it was a lot going through that.
Yes.
But during that, and this is back to you, Brian, now that we've got this thing in process, is it comes back to the park itself. And I would think that when we look at our CIP budgets for future improvements up there, that we look at trying to put more waterers around, faucets around the facility where people park their trailers to avoid those communal water troughs that we see, because we still see them occasionally, and then to look at the future development of the individual stalls rather than using the pipe crawls up there. I'm not trying to put myself out of business, but they're not the healthiest thing either for that, and to look at that in future CIP projects so we can again be up to par on trying to prevent communicable diseases and the spread of them up there.
Further questions? Burl?
Good report there, Frank, and I'm glad we're finally doing this, because I've trailered horses all over the western part of the United States and never was able to get into a stable or some states without these health papers and everything. I don't know why that California don't require them everywhere you go, but most other states do, and lots of diseases go around. But good job, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheryl, do we have any cards?
No cards on this item.
Okay. Any further questions? No, well, this is to approve the policy. Frank, you did a real good job.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Doctor, I'm sorry, before we vote, did you have any comments? Okay, that's fine. Okay. Thank you for being here tonight. Excuse me, Cheryl.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. That motion carries 5-0.
Thank you again. Okay, we'll go back to item 6B. This is appointment to the Parks and Recreation Commission. And the city clerk has this report.
Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, this item is for the City Council to consider and appoint one member to the Parks and Recreation Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the commission involve proposing and reviewing, as well as adopting recommendations to the City Council concerning matters involving the city's Parks and Recreation system. Norco Municipal Code Chapter 2.22 outlines some of the requirements to serve on the commission. And this vacancy is a result of a resignation that was submitted back on September 7th of this year by Melissa Woodward. The recruitment process involved the release of a public notice on September 19th. The application deadline was last week, October 23rd. And during that recruitment period, the city clerk's office advertised heavily on social media, on the city's website, through our e-blast, and also on the in the weekly highlights. During that process, the city clerk's office received a total of 5 applications. And there is your list of applicants. That basically concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I do see that we may have some of the applicants in the audience and have submitted speaker cards. So unless you have any questions, I can call them up.
Any questions? You have speaker cards also?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Start with those.
Bill Naylor.
Evening again, Bill.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Most of you know me very well. I've been a member of the community for several years now and came to this community because of my interest in the Horsetown USA and the ability to use my horses. I came from a background in Parks and Recreation, and I actually have worked with Brian for many years. I have a background of 25 years of working in Parks and Recreation in a variety of fields, everything from managing a small city zoo to supervising their park rangers to running their rental programs for facilities and equipment, doing a lot of special events, coordinating the city's fun festival for several years, including parades and that kind of stuff. I really have had a great time for 25 years working with the city. It was funny because I came from Cal Poly Pomona and took on a part-time job with the city to take care of their zoo, and we were able to develop it into a very classy position as far as in Southern California. We had people driving for many miles to go to it. From that, I went on to do other things with the city. Because of my experience, I was able to move up to code enforcement, and of course, that's usually not a very pleasant thing for a lot of people, but we had a good time with code enforcement. But again, my desire in working with people, I love working with people. Sometimes they don't always like me working with me if they've got a code enforcement issue, but that's neither here nor there. But I do enjoy trying to find ways to get things done, and I would like very much the opportunity to serve in the position of Commissioner for Parks and Recreation. Somebody might say, well, why do you want to switch from streets, trails, and utilities to Parks and Recreation? One of the reasons, again, is because of my background in Parks and Recreation, but secondly, Parks and Recreation actually takes care of about half the city trails as it now is. And I really ride those trails all the time and would be very interested in helping with overseeing that type of a program and working with giving community input. Also, there are a lot of activities that go on up at George Ingalls Park that I'm really interested in, and I have, over the years, helped put on horse shows, been show chairman, things like that. So, again, I think I would be a very qualified candidate, and I appreciate you considering me. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions for Bill? Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Cynthia Gunderson.
Hi, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm much shorter. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Cindy Gunderson, and I'm hopeful that the council will consider me for a position on the Norco Park and Recreations Commission. My family was drawn to Norco primarily for its patriotic and animal-keeping lifestyle that make Norco so unique and special. Our family is active within the community and frequents many of our parks, trails, events, and activities throughout our city. I can often be found jogging through the city on our beautiful trails during the evenings, but you probably won't recognize me. My husband and I have 4 children, and 3 of them are adults, so they've since moved out. We have a 15-year-old son, Dylan, who's a sophomore in high school. We also have 2 dogs. Their names are Liberty and Justice. And I work locally here at Norco College as a research specialist. I serve on the California School Employees Association's Communications Committee. I volunteer with the 100 Mile Club, and I run with the CRC Running Community. Currently, I'm finishing my master's degree in public administration. Our family also supports many local causes, particularly veteran-related. My husband, Jason, is an Army veteran, and he has 3 generations of bricks at the George A. Ingalls Memorial Plaza. And of course, I got him a flag on 6th Street. And although it was long ago, I love that picture of him. He's really handsome. As you know, Norco College, we're going to get a Veterans Resource Center. And I volunteered to help out with all the veterans on November 9th. We're going to celebrate them all at our college, and I'm looking forward to that event. And I'm also a VetNet ally, and that's someone who's been trained to deal with veterans and any of their issues they might have. I'm not a counselor, but I can get them the information they need whenever they need help. And as a mother of 4 children, I've experienced and understood the need and importance of our parks and recreation to Norco families. Our families are enriched by our city's 15 parks, its trails, and many recreational opportunities that Norco offers. I look forward to helping and encouraging more families to enjoy the outdoors and healthy lifestyle that Norco is so well suited for. The current commission has done an excellent job of scheduling fun and engaging events for our residents. In fact, I have been so impressed by their efforts that I am hopeful that I can be part of and help contribute to this exceptional team. I look forward to connecting and working with all of you, and I look forward to helping to contribute to solutions when our commission is faced with a challenge. Given the opportunity, I am hopeful that my ability to listen, organize, and communicate with others can be an asset to our Park and Recreation Commission and Norco residents. Thank you for consideration, and have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I'm so sorry about the Dodgers.
Any questions? Thank you.
Michael Mendoza.
Hi, Michael.
Hello. Well, I'm back again. Going to try a second time, and third or fourth if I have to. Briefly, I had served 31 years in law enforcement. I've got a degree in Christian education. I serve at Grace Fellowship Church my whole life. I'm 60 years old now. Since probably 15 years old, I've been in some type of public service. As I mentioned last time, I got my honeydews done. I've been retired 5 years, and now I'm ready to serve, and I've got a lot of great ideas. Was a regional director for the Foundation of Pure Spanish Horse, covers California, Nevada, and Hawaii. We have Andalusians. We love them. 2 dogs, 10 chickens. Came here from Anaheim 15 years ago with a cat. So it's kind of addicting to come into this town with the horses. At one point I had 13, so I had to scale back a little bit. But I'm here to serve, and if I'm not chosen this time, competition is getting more fierce, but you know what? I don't give up. So if I don't get chosen this time, I'll be back next time. Thank you.
Any questions at all? Thank you so much.
J.T. Guru.
Good evening, JT. How are you?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm JT Guru, and currently president of Saddle Sore Riders. I've used most all of the parks here, in town, out of town. I bring a lot of skill as far as using the parks and helping with them. I would be happy to have some good words and help with making some decisions to help our town stay strong and keep Norco's dirt.
Any questions for JT? Thanks, JT.
Thank you.
Jeff Cahan?
We are not going to accept your application. Right.
Well, then I guess I'll change my speech to my thank you for allowing me to serve. I am here as the chairman of the Parks and Rec Commission, and I certainly do not envy your decision tonight. I just wanted to go on record as saying I am absolutely thrilled at not only the quantity of applicants, but clearly the quality of applicants that we have in this round. So I would be honored to serve with any one of them, and I know that the reality is one will be chosen and 4 won't, so I would invite the other 4 to please still get involved with Norco in some way. If you're not already doing something, we've got plenty of opportunities to use your talents and your experiences. For instance, we have openings on our Christmas parade committee. I'd love to see more names and faces help us in that event. So, but seriously, we've got some great candidates. I don't envy your choice, but I know whoever you select will be a great addition to our commission, and I look forward to working with them. So thank you.
And you have 5 volunteers you can add to your list. Okay.
That concludes public comments.
Thank you, Cheryl. Council have any comments?
I have a comment.
You can do our...
I just wanted to say there's some really great people. Those of you know me, what it took 3 times for me to get on the Park and Rec Commission. I served 10 years. It's really tough. December 7th, we could use some help, by the way, just so you know. I'll give you a call. But please keep trying. There's lots of things to do in the city of Norco. So.
And I also want to thank all the applicants. That it's not an easy choice. But stay involved. Just keep at it. I don't know why it took Kevin 3 times to get appointed.
They knew him.
Their chairman at the time on Parks and Rec was there for 10 years as chairman, Mark Harpin. And that would have been the difficulty right there. Pardon?
We built a lot of parks on.
Mayor, An appointment
Yes.
to the commission requires a majority vote, and currently what we have is 1 vote for Michael Mendoza, 2 for J.T. Guru, and 2 for Cynthia Gunderson. So we have to have another round of voting.
Okay. Thank God you're just making a mark. Versions of us.
I do.
Okay, so for the second round of voting, we had 2 votes for Cynthia Gunderson and a majority vote with 3 votes for J.T. Guru. So congratulations, Mr. Guru. You've been appointed to the Parks and Recreation Commission.
Congratulations, JT. Cynthia, you had a good runner-up effort. Don't give up. Michael, thank you.
His seat. You're looking at his seat, huh?
Yeah. Okay, let's move into item 7A. This is a continued appeal hearing for conditional use permit 2017-14. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This is an item that was approved by the Planning Commission, and that action was appealed by the City Council. It was first heard on October 18th and then continued to this meeting. At the October 18th meeting, there were some changes that the City Council wanted to see incorporated into the project, and those have either been incorporated into the site plan or to the conditions of approval. And I'll briefly go down what those changes were. The first one actually was not a recommendation from from the City Council. It was a result of having to provide more paved area for parking, which increased the amount of required landscaping based upon the 15% requirement. So a clause was added to condition 12 that the minimum amount of landscaping would have to be 2,261 square feet, reflecting the expanded developed area. And then condition number 13, that the plans for the landscaped area would have to be submitted to the Planning Division for approval before issuance of a building permit. The City Council directed that they did not want the rear portion of the property to be left vacant with only the condition that it be maintained free of weeds. So condition 14 was amended to require that it be covered in gravel and maintained weed-free. City Council also wanted to emphasize an issue that was brought up by the Planning Commission, that the building, once it's converted to commercial purposes, can never go back to being used as a residence. And condition number 18 was modified such that the applicant has to comply with all ADA requirements, and that includes tenant improvement construction for the washroom and break room to meet accessibility requirements, and that the washroom can only consist of a toilet and a sink, no shower or bath. The City Council also directed that commercial meters, whether they have just one or also have a second for landscaping, they both be provided, they would have to provide backflow preventer devices on all of their commercial water meters. The council gave direction that there would be no outdoor storage of tires, and added a condition that rather than the outdoor storage pads that were being proposed, that there be a building not larger than 900 square feet to store the tires in. The applicant has proposed extending the existing garage to accommodate that 900 square feet as opposed to a separate building. So condition number 36 was amended so that that extension matches the materials and colors of the existing garage. And then condition number 39 was amended so that tires shall not be stored outside of enclosed structures. There was some misunderstanding about when the business would be able to operate. So condition number 40 was added, that business operations shall not begin prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the new commercial use, which means all of the construction has been completed. And then upon the issuance of the occupancy, the building, as mentioned earlier, can no longer be used for residential purposes, and that business operations can't begin prior to the issuance of a business license also. And it was pointed out that the driveway approach needs to be brought up to city standards, and that the existing sidewalk that stops partially within the landscaped area has to be completed to city standards. And so condition number 41 was added, that requiring those two things, that the driveway approach that accesses the main drive aisle to the back of the property be expanded to meet city standards, and that the incomplete sidewalk be constructed to meet city standards. With the conditional use permit, there are findings that have to be made for a project to be approved. Quickly, those are that the requested CUP will not adversely affect the general plan or public convenience or general welfare of persons residing or working in the neighborhood. Second, the requested use will not adversely affect the adjoining land uses and the growth and development of the area in which it is proposed. Third, the size and shape of the site proposed for the use is adequate to allow the full development of the proposed use in a manner that's not detrimental to the particular area. And fourth, the traffic generated by the proposed use will not impose an undue burden upon the streets and highways in the area. As this is an appeal hearing, the City Council has three options that it can do. It can uphold the Planning Commission approval, which only requires a roll call vote. It can overturn the Planning Commission's action and deny the project, or it can overturn the Planning Commission action and approve the project with changes and I've summarized the changes that were discussed by the City Council on October 18th. And I do want to point out that the code enforcement officer visited the site today, and he has indeed removed all of the outdoor tire storage. It's not there anymore. And the business proponent and the property owner are both in the audience to answer any questions that the City Council might have. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions for staff?
I do.
Berwin was first.
On condition number 19 there, it says the project is required to maintain 8 parking spaces, including 1 accessible space. Does that accessible mean the handicap accessible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin?
Are you allowed to have a roll-off? Are they allowed to have those as part of a business?
You're allowed to have them under 2 scenarios. Temporary, you have to get a special event permit, and permanent, you have to get a conditional use permit.
So I was out there today. What are they going to do? Have they done either one of those 2 things?
There is a roll-off, and the applicant can address that. The issue was brought up at Project Review Board that if it was left there, it would be an issue with the Planning Commission. The understanding at Project Review Board, the statement was that it was going to be removed, so that issue was not addressed by the Planning Commission, but there is still one there, and the applicant can address that.
And then my other question, I only have a couple, is the applicant aware of this? So he can't go into business until all this stuff is done. I mean, this is really expensive. I mean, the ADA requirements, and how is he going to do the 30-foot road? Is there enough room to even do that?
Yeah, he's going to have to reconstruct the driveway and the sidewalk as well to meet city standards. The driveway is pretty close. Might not need a whole lot of widening, but he is going to have to finish that.
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So there's still a container on site.
Yes.
And if we move forward with this, that container is going to be removed?
Yes. It was supposed to have been, what was explained to me, it was supposed to be gone by today, but the contractor didn't do it, so it is still there. But I've been told that it's going to be gone by Friday, so.
Okay, and then after construction, and let's say you go through the process, you got occupancy, building, or business license, et cetera, containers will still not be allowed, storage containers will still not be allowed, okay, unless there's a separate application for a conditional use permit.
Correct.
Okay. Now, did you sit down with the applicant and go over all these changes?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't sit with him. I talked to him over the phone.
Okay.
Yes.
Instead of building the separate 900-foot cover in the center of the property, it's now being proposed to add on to the garage.
Correct.
Okay. So is that, the existing garage, is that compliant with setbacks, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay, so by adding on to that, it's not going to interfere with any newer codes?
No.
Okay.
No. It will still meet setback requirements.
Any other questions for staff? Does the applicant care to make any comments or address any issues? That would be you, yes. Good evening.
There's not much to say. I just appreciate your patience, and I've been long way so far. So whatever decision that you make today is good to me, and I just say thank you and appreciate it. And also thank to Steve has been almost done. They've done a very good job so far. Put a lot of effort on that job. So just say thank you, appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And you have any questions on these changes or what you went over with
we
Mr.
went through
King? You
already with
understand
Steve.
them all?
We've always been talking that you instruct him. We were talking through the phone, and all the changes have been addressed already.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, any other further discussion? Okay, can we clarify the motion of approval? That would be our third choice with the changes? Steve?
Yes, you are correct. So the motion would be to overturn the Planning Commission approval and approve the project with the changes that we've discussed and are included in the resolution that's attached.
Is that the one you meant, Kevin? Yeah, okay.
Okay, please vote. That motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Item last, or almost last, City Council, City Manager, Staff Communications. Andy? John? Kevin?
Corner of California and 6th on the southeast corner, southwest corner. Can we, I've been kind of asking for the weeds to be knocked down for quite some time. I know the fire department has been really busy, but it's quite a fire hazard, and I know they're going to burn down that building, and I know that the owner is very hard to find, but the weeds are really bad, and I'm wondering, they've been that way for quite some time. And then the second thing I'd like to ask, would it be possible for us to put on the agenda to talk about flower vendors and such? Because one of the things Robin and I have learned is that the flower vendors tend to be part of a, they're really not doing it sometimes on their own, and it's human trafficking. And I'd like to at least have a discussion on if we have a code or something we can do to eliminate them if possible. I know that the law's changing, there's rights, but if we could just put it on the agenda and talk about it.
Yes, staff is looking at bringing back a code change to address that issue.
Oh, well, I'm good then. All right, thank you. That's all.
Ted?
Unless Eric's going to talk about it, and too bad we don't have a full house. This weekend, the Riverside County Sheriff's K-9 trials at Ingalls Park, so be there Saturday, 8 a.m.
Oh my God, we got to be at 5 places at 8 a.m.
Yes, you do, don't you? Yeah, just spread yourself out, fella.
Robin?
Just real quick, I wanted to let everyone know you should have received this, the City of Norco coming to you, and I wanted to publicly thank staff for doing this and reaching out. I know since I've been on council, communications have been a big thing for me, and I think it's really important that our residents meet and talk to staff face to face and get that information firsthand and make connections so that they're able to kind of sort through the information that they read online. And so kudos to our staff for doing this. I really, really appreciate it, and I think it's very, very important. So thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Berwin? Eric?
Yes, just to add further on what Councilmember Hoffman brought up, it is the third year in the City of Norco with our 22nd annual K-9 demonstration and trials. It's free, open to the public on Saturday starting at 8 o'clock at Ingalls Park. Among the working K-9s, you'll see teams, K-9 teams from other departments in the state of California, but also the military and the nation. So it's very, very interesting to see these working K-9s with their handlers and how they they go through the obstacles and some of the training they experience. If you pay attention to Norco Sheriff's Office Facebook page, I've been posting a lot of stuff about the canines from our own department. We love our canines. We've worked with them for going back decades, and it's just been a strong partnership that we've thoroughly enjoyed because canines make fantastic partners. And further with that, we will have our SWAT team there, our dive team. CAL FIRE will have a demonstration, and so will the Norco Animal Rescue Team. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Gina? Brian?
Just tag on to what Robin said. Our pop-up will be this weekend at Norco Hills Park. We invite everybody to come out at 10 o'clock. We also will, earlier that morning, we'll be conducting a meeting with Landscape Maintenance Assessment District Number 2 with those residents. And then just a reminder, as Ted talked about earlier, November 11th, our Veterans Day program. And then this Saturday at the Veterans Memorial at 10 o'clock, Larry Eckhoff from our Veterans Committee will be doing a coin cleaning of all of the brick coins. And so we're asking for volunteers who have time to come out there. We have some scouts and some other people who will be helping him. But anybody who would like to help clean the coins on all of the service bricks that are in the Circle of Honor, be there at 10 o'clock. He's bringing donuts.
Donuts, and all the cops are going to be above? Thank you, Brian. Steve? Chad? Matt? Cheryl? Once again, thanks, Cheryl, to you and your staff for all you did at the farmers market. I mean, all staff. You guys are doing a great job. I'd like to adjourn this meeting in memory of a good friend we lost last week, Linda Moore. So we're adjourned. Thank you.